Chapter 61. Countdown. The night was deep, and the warmth of last night's vows still lingered as the Oro Jackson cut through the calm sea. Most of the crew, still a little hungover and flushed from the celebrations, slept soundly. Only the soft footsteps of the night watch and the whisper of waves against the hull broke the silence. Kyle, however, was awake. He leaned against the rail outside the infirmary, watching moonlight scatter silver across the water. With a quiet creak, the infirmary door opened, and Dr. Crocus stepped out, holding an oil lamp as if to take in the sea air. He didn't seem surprised to find Kyle there. He joined him at the rail, and together they stared into the black expanse. "Can't sleep?" Crocus asked, his voice unusually clear in the stillness. "Kinda," Kyle replied without turning his head, "just thinking about some things that need to be done." They were silent for a moment. Then Crocus spoke again, abruptly. "I know about your request." Kyle stiffened slightly. Earlier that day he had conveyed his wishes through looks and subtle gestures, and Crocus had noticed. "When I first came aboard, I examined Roger," Crocus continued. "That fellow's body is as strong as a monster. Aside from some old injuries, there's nothing wrong with him." "Aren't you overthinking this?" "Even monsters get sick." Kyle turned his head. His golden eyes were startlingly bright in the dim light. "Please, Mr. Crocus, use your most careful, thorough methods and examine him again. Just consider it an unreasonable personal favor." Crocus studied him. There was no teasing in those golden eyes, only a solemnity that felt almost prophetic. After a long moment, he sighed and nodded. "All right, for the sake of you tricking me onto this ship." The next afternoon, as usual, Roger was laughing heartily on deck while arm-wrestling Jabba. Crocus walked up carrying his medical kit. "Roger, come here." Roger paused, then pointed at himself with a wide, exaggerated grin. "Again? Crocus, don't tell me you've developed a taste for big muscles. I'm not into that." The crew burst into laughter. "Kwah! Kyle, this was your idea again, wasn't it?" someone shouted. Roger slammed his opponent's hand down, rose, and clapped Kyle on the shoulder with such force Kyle staggered. "I told you I'm fine. My body's tougher than a sea king's." After the last examination, Roger had made a habit of teasing Kyle, calling him an old man for worrying so much at such a young age. "Roger, it's just a routine checkup," Crocus said, his face calm, but his eyes betraying a stubborn focus. All right, you're impossible." Roger sat down on a crate, rolled up his sleeve with a grin. "Come on then, let our ship's doctor see what treasures are hiding in this old chest." Crocus ignored the joke. He snapped on his stethoscope, the expression on his face suddenly all business. The crew gathered around, grinning and nudging each other, ready for the captain's little spectacle. Crocus went through his examination, auscultation, percussion, an eye check, methodical and precise. At the end of it, he still looked outwardly composed. "See? I told you I'm fine," Roger declared, laughing triumphantly. Crocus didn't answer. He reached into his medical bag and produced a strange instrument. Part compass, part magnifying glass, then placed it carefully on Roger's chest. Curiosity rippled through the group. Even Buggy leaned forward, trying to make out the instrument's intricate markings. Minutes stretched on. The laughter on deck died away. When a doctor stopped smiling, people stopped joking. Slowly, everyone realized Crocus's calm was slipping. Small beads of sweat had formed on his brow. Crocus's hand, still holding the instrument, froze as if turned to stone. His face shifted slowly, from the professional calm he always wore, to confusion, then disbelief, and finally a grave solemnity. It was as if the air itself had thickened. Even Jabba, usually unconcerned, wiped his grin away and swallowed hard. "Hey, Crocus, what's wrong?" Rayleigh's voice cut through the growing silence. He could feel that something serious was happening. Crocus raised his head slowly. He took off his glasses and wiped them vigorously, as if trying to make sure he hadn't misread what he saw. When he put them back on and met Roger's eyes, his expression was impossibly complicated. He set the instrument down, each movement heavy, deliberate. "Roger," he said, his voice raw and hoarse, "you have an incurable disease. In all my decades of practice, and in every medical text I've ever read, I've never seen anything like it." The words hit like an explosion. The room fell utterly silent. Shanks and Buggy stared with mouths agape, the color drained from their faces. Jabba's liquor flask clattered to the deck and spilled, but he didn't even seem to notice. Taro, Nosdon, Spencer, Pittum, everyone's faces froze as if they'd just heard the most absurd joke on earth. Only Roger remained unchanged, that same smile still on his lips. He paused for a beat, then a booming laugh ripped through the air. It wasn't his usual bold, careless guffaw. This one had a wild, feral edge that made the room go cold. "So that's it." Roger slammed his fist into his palm, suddenly lit up. "No wonder I've been coughing so violently lately. I thought it was just from drinking too much and choking." He rose and clapped Crocus on the shoulder with a strong, steady hand. "So, how much longer do I have?" Crocus, shaken by how casually Roger spoke of it, forced himself to breathe and reply. "Without treatment, at most 3 to 4 years. If I throw everything I can at prolonging you, maybe 5. But a cure, there isn't one." 5 years, huh? Roger rubbed his chin as if weighing a business proposal. He gave a small, calculating smile. That's tight, but enough." The others stared at him as if he'd lost his mind. Enough for what? The question hung in the air, but no one could answer. The crew was still reeling. Roger's seemingly careless reaction had left them stunned and speechless. "Captain," Shanks's voice broke. Tears welled in his eyes. "You bastard, what kind of joke is this?" Jabba sprang forward and grabbed Roger by the collar, his eyes bloodshot. "This isn't funny. Not funny at all." Roger let him. The smile on his face faded. For the first time his expression grew solemn. He met Jabba's furious gaze, then looked around at each of his companions. "I'm not joking," he said quietly. "How could I die from some ordinary illness? If I'm going to die, it will be where and when I choose." Kyle had been standing at the edge of the crowd, watching everything in silence. By the original timeline, Roger only met Crocus after being diagnosed. In this altered chain of events, Kyle's intervention and the brief display of his precognitive abilities had brought Crocus aboard sooner. Even so, Crocus had been unable to cure Roger. What Roger needed now was the world's finest physician, not to mend surface wounds, but to steal a little extra time from death itself for his captain. Although he had braced himself, seeing that cruel truth laid out and hearing Roger's laugh, a laugh that seemed to split the sky, still sent a raw ache through him. It wasn't fear, and it wasn't an attempt to flee. It was a man's roar, the defiant cry of someone who has just been shown the finish line of his life and refuses to bow to it. Kyle clenched his fists so hard his nails bit into his palms. Crocus stared at the cluster of faces before him, and above them all at that towering captain, and suddenly the reason he had boarded this ship came into sharp focus. Finding the Rumba pirates had been a promise, but keeping the man standing before him alive a little longer and bearing witness to that final blaze of brilliance would be the most important and the cruelest battle of his medical career. "All right, everyone, cheer up." Roger shoved Jabba aside, planted himself at the bow with his hands on his hips, and shouted, "It's only 5 years, right? I'll cram into these 5 years more excitement than most people get in 50. He spun, his eyes bright and fierce like a torch, sweeping across every face, whether sad, angry, or bewildered. "My lads," his voice swallowed the crash of the waves, "we don't have time to lollygag on dull islands. Wipe those long faces off. Our journey from now on is going to accelerate," he cut in. "Hoist the sails, full speed ahead. We'll use every moment left to find the final island and turn this world upside down." A thunderous cheer exploded from the crew. They roared as if to cast out every bit of sorrow and regret, shaping it into a fierce wind that pushed the ship forward. The sadness didn't vanish so much as transform into something hotter, harder, more resolute. The Oro Jackson's sails snapped full, the bow cleaving the blue sea. For the first time in memory, they surged forward at a terrifying clip, plunging into the unknown, storm-swept reaches of the Grand Line. The destination hadn't changed, but everyone aboard understood that, from that moment on, the countdown had been set into high gear. Ever since Roger had barked, "Accelerate," the Oro Jackson had been like an animal freed from its chains. The crew stopped tiptoeing around marine patrols, no longer lingered on islands for more than they needed, and even their celebrations had grown hurried and wilder. Whatever sorrow they carried had been packed down deep and turned into a burning fuel, driving that legendary ship ever onward toward whatever fate waited for it. The New World. Eddard, woe. The sky was a flawless blue, not a cloud in sight. Seagulls chased the wake off the stern. Everything looked calm and ordinary. "Hey, Kyle. Gorgeous day. Want to have a fishing contest?" Shanks called, bounding up the deck with a fishing rod taller than he was. Buggy lagged behind, lugging a deluxe bait box and snorting in derision. "Kyle's not as childish as you. He's probably plotting some grand line strategy, right, Kyle?" Kyle was propped against the rail, whittling a scrap of wood with a small knife. He only smiled and said nothing. A thin, sharp cry came from the crow's nest. "Look up, everyone. Look at the sky." The laughter on deck died instantly. Everyone craned their necks, confused, and then their pupils narrowed. A colossal shadow fell over the Oro Jackson, as if an entire continent had drifted overhead. It wasn't clouds. A sky-darkening fleet of at least 25 enormous pirate ships hovered in the air, defying every law of nature. Their sails and hulls cast a pall that turned midday into dusk in an instant. At the front of the squadron, on a flagship crowned with a gilded lion's head, stood a broad-shouldered man with a mane of long, golden hair. He kept his hands clasped behind his back, staring down from above with the casual arrogance of someone used to looking from a higher throne. "Golden Lion? Shiki," Jabba breathed, his fingers tightening instinctively around the twin axes at his waist. The crew snapped to attention. Under the weight of that suffocating presence, the Oro Jackson felt tinier than a toy. "Yo, Roger!" The Golden Lion's voice rolled over them like muffled thunder, domineering, amused. "Long time no see. You look like you're in a hurry. Found something interesting?" Roger called up, flashing a grin that showed off a row of bright white teeth. "Koo-ha! It's Shiki!" one of the sky pirates answered, and then Shiki's voice cut through the wind. "Still fond of hovering in the air, Roger? Afraid you'll slip and fall into the sea and drown?" "Less nonsense." Shiki's laugh turned casual as he waved a hand. At his gesture, the flying pirates' ships rose and matched the Oro Jackson's mainmast, settling alongside in a line of black hulls and fluttering flags. From his place amid the rigging, he looked every bit the lightning-quick, larger-than-life man his name implied. "Roger," Shiki went on, his tone shifting from mockery to earnest fever, "I have a plan that will change this world. The only thing missing is a man like you." He spread his arms as if to embrace the whole ocean. "I command the largest fleet these waters have ever seen. I have the finest men at my back. And you." He leaned forward, eyes bright with greedy promise. "You know where the ancient weapons are rumored to be. The weapons that can level the world. Become my right hand, Roger." His voice was intoxicating. "Combine your strength with my fleet. Together we'll own this world. Wealth, fame, power, everything you want will be yours." The flying pirates cheered and whooped behind him, their faces lit with avarice. On their decks, torches and flags painted the air with shadow and gold. Their sailors licked their lips at the thought. Silence held on the Oro Jackson. The crew gathered along the rails and masts, eyes fixed on their captain. The sea hissed below, gulls cut the air, and for a long moment every man's breath seemed to wait on Roger's answer. Roger's grin lingered, then slid away. The warmth left his eyes and a weight settled into his features. He looked up at Shiki, thoughtful, unreadable, no longer the joking pirate they'd known a heartbeat before. Roger regarded Shiki calmly, as if looking at a fool in a neighboring harbor. "Shiki." His voice was low, but it carried to everyone nearby. "I have absolutely no interest in boring things like ruling the world." He paused, then that fearless smile returned to his face. "What's the point of being a pirate if you aren't free?" Shiki, the Golden Lion, went instantly black. The fervor in his eyes curdled into cold killing intent. "So you refuse, Roger? Then you're looking for death." He snarled. "It means we'll wipe all of you out. Men, since he doesn't know what's good for him, blast them and their ship to pieces." On his command, the muzzles of 25 floating warships swung and pointed at the lone ship below. "Fire!" The sky answered. Cannon after cannon detonated in a deafening roar. Hundreds of thousands of iron balls poured down like a black storm, whistling death as they fell. "All hands engage!" Rayleigh's voice cut cleanly through the thunder of explosions. At some point, he had already drawn his long sword. Kyle didn't even turn his head. He swung his arm back, and a flash of silver swordlight cut the air. The first few cannonballs were cleanly bisected, each bursting into two symmetrical showers of sparks mid-flight. He took a step forward and thrust his right fist out in what looked like an ordinary punch. Bang! A dull thud rippled through the air. The space in front of him buckled. In an instant, within a wide fan-shaped arc, a dozen cannonballs slammed into an invisible barrier and detonated with a thunderous roar. Jabba was more brutal. He laughed and sent the twin axes at his hips spinning from his hands. They became two blurring, high-speed whirlwinds, carving two lethal, fiery arcs through the hail of shot. The crew roared in answer. Men at sword and swivel guns scrambled to their stations, firing small cannons and hacking at any stray projectiles. But sheer numbers told. Two fighters could only do so much. A single ship could not hold back an entire fleet. A stray round tore through a mainsail, ripping it open and sending it down in flames. The hull shuddered under a steady drum of explosions. Wood splinters and gunpowder smoke choked the deck, and each blast heaved the ship so violently it leaned at dangerous angles, almost swallowed by the waves. Damn it! It's like raining cannonballs, Nosdon snarled, bashing a loose cannonball aside with his fist until his arm went numb from the impact. Hard aport, avoid direct fire. Spencer barked, sweat plastering his shirt to his skin. Shanks and Buggy stood back to back, fighting to keep their footing as debris and shrapnel rained down. Buggy's face had gone deathly white. We're gonna die. We're gonna die for real this time. Shanks, you jerk, don't drag me out. It's safer behind the mast, he wailed. Shanks paid him no heed. The smaller man planted his feet, gripped his saber, and calmly sliced through the explosive fragments hurtling toward them as though cutting through paper. On the enemy flagship, Golden Lion watched the struggling Oro Jackson with cold, detached eyes. A cruel curve lifted one corner of his mouth. Roger, he mocked aloud, is this really your answer? Pathetic. He drew twin swords from his waist, Sakura 10 and Kogarashi, and leveled them toward the sea as if directing the ocean itself. Lion's threat, Earth Scroll, he cried. No sooner had the words left his mouth than the calm line of water below them began to boil. Two mountain-sized columns of seawater were ripped up by an unseen force, twisting and roaring through the air. They condensed into two enormous, snarling lions of water, mouths gaping, and lunged straight for the Oro Jackson. If they struck, the ship would be severely damaged. "Ku-ha-ha-ha! Is that all you've got, Shiki?" Roger bellowed, laughing as his gaze burned through the smoke and fire, locked on the golden figure high above. Before his words even died away, he stamped his feet and shot into the sky, heading straight for the Golden Lion's flagship. Arrogant! Shiki's eyes narrowed. This was the omen he had been waiting for. He crossed his twin swords and brought them down toward the charging force. Clang! The instant the blades met, a visible shockwave rippled outward. Black and red lightning crackled and burst around Roger's saber as he shouted, "Ace!" Golden Lion's twin blades were sheathed in top-tier armament hockey. The moment they met, a raw, overwhelming force slammed through him. His arms went numb, the web between his thumb and forefinger was torn open, and he was hurled backward several steps through the air. The two watery male lions that had leapt at the Oro Jackson disintegrated from the shock, collapsing into a torrential downpour and splashing back into the sea. "Is this your power, Roger?" Golden Lion shouted. There was no fear on his face, only a feral, exhilarated grin. Good, very good. They traded blows across the flagship's deck in a blur of offense and defense, steel flashing, sparks showering down. Each collision sent visible shockwaves through the air. Black and red lightning braided with golden swordlight, carving deep, smoking grooves into the ship's sturdy planks. No one aboard could get near. The aftershock sent would-be onlookers spitting blood, tossed backward like broken sacks to crash unconscious against the rail. "Slash wave!" Golden Lion roared, slashing with one sword. A ribbon of golden light, like a flying blade, tore through the air. "God avoidance!" Someone shouted. Roger didn't dodge. He met the move with his own slash. The black and red sword light overwhelmed the air, cleaving the golden arc cleanly in two, then, without losing momentum, drove straight at the Golden Lion. "Wow! Did you see that? Shanks!" On the Oro Jackson, Buggy ducked behind a broken mast, poking his little head out and pointing at the distant flagship. "The captain just tore their ship apart. Golden Lion's finished." "Idiot! Look ahead!" Shanks barked without turning. A casual backhanded slash sent a stray cannonball spinning off course. Buggy jumped as he yanked his head back, A burning splinter whistled past his nose and slammed into the very spot where he had been peeking. He went green with fright. We're doomed. We're doomed. Everyone's going to die. Below, the fighting had reached a fever pitch. The odds were brutally clear. 2 fists could not match 4 hands. 1 ship alone could hardly endure an entire fleet. Kyle stood at the stern, palms pressed to the wet deck, and closed his eyes. He needed an opening, a medium that would let him push his powers to the limit. Then, without warning, the untroubled sky went dark. Not from Golden Lion's armada, but from real storm clouds rolling in. A fierce wind rose, the sea began to churn, a bolt of lightning split the sky and thunder followed in a deafening roll. An unprecedented storm slammed down on them. What the hell? Golden Lion braced himself, staring at the sudden change in weather. Of all times. Enormous waves rose and currents turned chaotic. The fleet hovering overhead pitched and lurched in the gale. Their bombardments lost any accuracy they'd had. The Roger pirates stood frozen. The storm had come too suddenly, too oddly. Is heaven on our side? Jabba shouted through the rain, wiping his face and laughing wildly. Only Kyle remained unnerved by none of it. As the storm hit, he opened his eyes. He didn't panic. Instead, a terrible light flared in his golden irises. The chance he'd been waiting for had arrived. Kyle muttered, extending his hands flat, palms toward the surging sea. Now this is my home turf. He didn't need to summon new waves. He simply seized the storm's fury. Invisible currents radiated from him, and the chaos of the ocean seemed to find a master. Rows of colossal swells, tens of meters high like mountain ridges, broke their natural course, reared up, and charged toward the Golden Lion's aerial fleet. The pirates in the sky watched in horror as the sea lunged at them like a giant beast. Kyle looked up into the thunder-filled sky, cupping his hands as if holding 1,000 invisible strings. The lightning stopped striking at random. As if answering his call, bolts began to converge and coil under his will. A thick spear of lightning cleaved through the air and struck a pirate ship's powder magazine dead on. The ship erupted in a violent chain of explosions, flame and lightning lighting each other in midair, a brutal symphony of destruction. Boom. Rumble. Lightning struck with surgical precision, shattering masts, setting sails ablaze, even cleaving whole ships in 2. Under Kyle's control, the sea heaved and the sky roared, converging into a 3-dimensional onslaught that battered the flying pirates from every angle. It's Kyle, he's doing this! Buggy shrieked, pointing at him, voice shaking with equal parts fear and awe. That man, he's not human. He's the storm. The rest of the Roger pirates stood frozen, mouths open. They had known Kyle was a devil fruit user, but none of them had imagined his power could reach such cataclysmic heights. Kyle smiled inwardly. I don't make storms. I'm just nature's courier. On the flagship, Golden Lion watched his fleet go down one by one, eyes bloodshot. He bellowed orders, straining to steady his ships, but against a tempest amplified by Kyle and taking on the force of a natural disaster, human strength felt negligible. Distracted by his enraged roar, he didn't see the next assault coming. An enormous wave, like an invisible giant hand, slammed into the pirate ship he stood on. Boom! The flagship lurched and broke apart, and the pirates aboard were thrown into the raging sea. The Golden Lion was ripped into the air by the blast, tumbling end over end. In the chaos, the ship's rudder, already cracked by the waves, was snatched by a gust and spun like a javelin through the storm. A dull, wet thud. Through the driving rain and flashing lightning, that high-speed rudder struck Golden Lion square on the head without missing. Supreme Great Rudder! For a breathless moment, time seemed to stop. Golden Lion hung suspended in the air, eyes wide, face frozen between surprise and pain. Blood ran down the rudder and into his golden hair, grotesque and almost absurd. He wasn't dead, but the fight was finished for him. As Golden Lion lay badly hurt, the storm that had whipped the sea to fury finally spent itself and began to ease. The dark clouds broke apart, sunlight slipped back through, and all that remained on the water were the burning, sinking hulks of more than 20 vessels. The Oro Jackson, though scarred, still floated stubbornly. Think of the value of the Atom Treasure Tree, bro! The crew shifted their gaze from the chaotic battlefield back to Kyle, who stood at the stern, unusually pale and silent. Roger sheathed his sword, crossed the deck, gave Kyle a hearty slap on the shoulder, and broke into a booming laugh. Ha! Well done, Kyle. Chapter 63. Xiaobi Zaiji, You're Playing with Fire. The news of the Battle of Edwar spread faster than the storm that had birthed it. A few days later, a newsbird dropped the latest paper onto the deck of the Oro Jackson. The front page headline, printed in letters so bold they seemed to glare, screamed, "The Great Battle of the Century. The Golden Lion's Grand Fleet Annihilated. Gol D. Roger, the undefeated legend of the seas." The article painted the clash in vivid, dramatic strokes. It described Golden Lion Shiki's 25 flying battleships as if gods descending from the heavens, and framed the Oro Jackson's solitary fight as an epic, tragic stand of heroism. Toward the end, the tone shifted from breathless narration to stunned awe, dwelling on the storm itself, strange, almost guided. The sea and thunder seemed to become Roger's allies, and the natural disaster transformed into a hammer of judgment, smashing the arrogant flying pirate fleet into the abyss. The newspaper blared the story in sensational headlines. The Golden Lion himself impaled through the head by a broken rudder, fleeing in disarray, his life hanging by a thread. This battle marks the end of a powerful era and the total deification of another legend. Jabba held the paper and laughed until tears streamed down his face. "Kuhaha! Ally of the sea, my foot! Whoever wrote this paper sure knows how to brag," he said. "It was Kyle who did it, and they give all the credit to the weather." Buggy slunk off to the side, fingers worrying at his almost seared red nose. "Don't even say it," he muttered, voice trembling. "I get weak-kneed at the sight of dark clouds now. Brother Kyle was even scarier than a devil that day." Kyle himself leaned against the railing, methodically wiping his saber, paying little attention to the newspaper's praise or his companion's chatter. The triumph had come and gone like a receding tide. The joy didn't last. What stayed with him was Crocus's verdict, at most 3 to 4 years. No amount of glory could buy Roger a single extra second. That helplessness sat in Kyle's chest like a tiny, invisible thorn, and it pricked him every time he thought of it. The Oro Jackson had taken heavy damage in the battle, so the crew had hauled her into the nearest quiet island. The shipyard was rudimentary, but it offered peace and a place to work. Shipwrights pounded away under the sun, and groups of crewmen drifted into town in 2s and 3s to resupply, or to drink and make as much noise as possible, trying to drown the exhaustion left by the fight. Kyle didn't join them. He had found a corner of the yard where a pile of discarded timber formed a crude shelter, and from there could see the entire Oro Jackson. He sat motionless, statue still, watching the ship. A tall, broad-shouldered man stepped between him and the sun. "Hey!" Kyle looked up. Douglas Bullett's face was like granite, hard, unreadable. The man known as the Demon Heir carried an aura of raw danger and power. He didn't waste words. "The storm at the Battle of Edwar, that was your doing," Bullet said flatly. "You're far stronger than what we've seen." Kyle said nothing, meeting him with the same calm stillness. Bullet pressed on, his deep voice leaving no room for argument. "Roger is strong, I'll give you that, but he's sick, he's a dying man, he doesn't have much time left. His strength will only keep slipping away with time." Bullet stepped forward, looking down at Kyle with a blade-sharp stare. "You're still young, and you're only getting stronger. Why cling to a sun that's about to set? Isn't it ridiculous to waste your talent on a ship that's sinking?" Kyle's expression finally shifted. The air around him seemed to drop several degrees. "You little bastard, you're playing with fire," Bullet thought, though he either didn't see it or simply didn't care. He believed in one law above all, the supremacy of strength. "Leave this place, Kyle," Bullet went on. "Strong men like us shouldn't be shackled by these so-called companion games. The Say ought to be our stage, not someone's funeral." "Are you done?" Kyle answered at last. His voice was low and soft, but it carried a coldness that cut through the tension. He never finished. In the space of a heartbeat, Kyle's figure flickered from where he stood and reappeared directly in front of Bullet. No flashiness, no theatrics, just a single unadorned straight punch. Bullet's pupils narrowed. Instinctively, he crossed his arms to meet the blow, his top-tier armament hockey hardening in an instant. Boom! A dull thud rolled through him, as if something had detonated inside his chest. Bullet felt like he'd been struck head-on by a full-speed charging Sea King. The bones in his arms cried out under the force, and he was launched backward like a cannonball, slamming into a wall of discarded ship planks. Cough! He fought to his feet from the spray of sawdust, a thin ribbon of blood at the corner of his mouth. Staring at Kyle, disbelief made his head swim. That punch had been pure, dominating, and impossibly powerful. You were right, Kyle said, stepping forward with a blank, unreadable face. Roger doesn't have much time left. His figure blurred again. Bullet's nerves went taut as he focused on tracking every move, ready to react. But Kyle didn't rush him this time. He simply extended a hand and leveled his palm in Bullet's direction from across the room. Bullet emitted a choked sound as a strange, high-frequency trembling ran through him. It wasn't an outside vibration, but something coming from inside. His muscles, his bones, even his organs began to shudder, a tearing sensation radiating outward from within. For a moment, Bullet's proud, steel body felt as if it had turned to fragile glass. Strong, weak, Kyle's voice echoed in his ears, oddly close and yet far away. An idiot like you, whose head is full only of muscle and strength, will never understand. What do you know? Bullet roared, forcing himself to fight the strange numbness crawling through his limbs. He threw a punishing punch. Kyle stepped aside with an almost lazy grace, letting the wind from the blow brush past him. Before Bullet could recover, Kyle came back with a single backhand and laid his palm against Bullet's spine. The effect was immediate. Bullet's body locked up as if a power had cut the cords to his muscles. His limbs convulsed and went limp. He couldn't even twitch a finger. His eyes went wide, then he collapsed to the deck, spasming helplessly. Kyle looked down at him with golden eyes that held no anger, only cold indifference. On this ship, every single person stakes their life behind that man, he said. We are not burying him. We are watching an era being born. Do you think Captain Roger's greatest strength is raw power? He asked. No, it's his charisma. He can make people smile and follow him to their deaths. That is something you will never understand. With that, Kyle released the hold. Whatever force had immobilized Bullet slipped away. Bullet lay on the ground, gasping for air. The numbness in his limbs was slowly fading, but the chill in his chest, the one that crawled into the marrow of his soul, would not leave. He had lost. He hadn't even used his merge fruit ability, and yet the defeat was clean and absolute. He hadn't come close enough to graze his opponent's clothes. He watched Kyle's back as the other man walked away. It wasn't an especially imposing figure, but somehow it overlapped with a memory of Roger standing at the bow, laughing into the storm. The likeness, however faint, quieted him. He sat up, leaning against a broken wall, and said nothing. In the shadow of the shipyard, Rayleigh and Jabba stood side by side. Jabba chuckled and took a sip of his drink. This kid really doesn't hold back, he said. Rayleigh pushed his glasses up and allowed a faint smile. There was always some noise on this ship that needed clearing out. It's a lot quieter now. He glanced toward the Oro Jackson, which was under repair once more, his expression deep. Time was running out. There was no room left for hesitation. Chapter 64, The Final Note. For days and nights the hammering never stopped. Under the skilled hands of the shipwrights, the Oro Jackson's battle damage slowly vanished, its scars smoothed away bit by bit. The crew's life settled back into familiar rhythms, drinking, card games, loud boasting, until the last fight felt like nothing more than a hazy memory after a long bender. One person didn't return to that easy routine. Douglas Bullet, the man whose presence kept others at a distance, grew quieter still. He stopped picking fights and spent most of his time alone in the shadow of the figurehead, motionless like a beast hunkered down for winter. Men steered clear of him on purpose, and by instinct, his shadow had become an unspoken no-go zone. Kyle leaned against the railing of the second deck, the sea breeze tugging at his clothes, and watched Bullet below. He sighed. Had he broken the kid? He couldn't place all the blame on Bullet either. In Bullet's world, there were only the strong and the stronger. He lived by the most primitive law of power, and silence might be his way of reckoning with it. Captain Roger didn't have long. To Bullet, that meant something ominous. The strongest was about to fall, and the crew's golden age would begin to crumble. He couldn't understand the kind of bond on this ship that seemed to reach beyond life and death. No more than a landlubber could understand the sea's lure. Kyle felt it differently. He had sailed with Roger for more than 20 years. This ship had carried him from naive youth to the steady pillar he was now. Every storm, every laugh and quarrel, every hard-earned victory and loss was woven into his bones. After 2 decades of weathering tempests together, even the coldest heart would have been warmed. Roger, Rayleigh, Jabba, they were no longer just crewmates. They were family, irreplaceable. Bullet had come aboard too late. His ties to the crew were shallow. He saw only Roger's power and not the quiet, magnetic authority behind it, the kind that made a man willing to follow with a smile until the very end. Kyle understood that, which made Bullet's fear feel small and misplaced. A timid voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Brother Kyle." He turned and saw Buggy and Shanks. Buggy was half hiding in front of Shanks, using him as a shield and peering out with a mixture of nervousness and curiosity. "That, Brother Kyle," Buggy forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. "That move you used the other day, the one that left Bullet twitching on the deck. What was the trick behind it? Can you teach me? If I knew that, I wouldn't be scared of sea kings anymore." Shanks socked Buggy on the back of the head. "Idiot, that's Brother Kyle's boba fruit power. How do you expect to learn it with your chop-chop fruit?" He turned to Kyle, scratching his head, eyes bright with genuine curiosity and admiration. "Seriously, Kyle, you were awesome controlling that storm, even cooler than the captain." "Hey, Shanks, how dare you say the captain isn't cool?" Buggy immediately forgot his fear and leapt up to argue. Watching the 2 clowns bicker, the tension in Kyle's face eased. He sighed, then flicked each of them on the forehead in exasperation. "Stop daydreaming. If you've got that much free time, swing your swords more and work on your hockey properly." "Ouch!" Buggy clapped a hand to his head and scowled at Shanks. "It's all your fault." Shanks just rubbed his head and snickered. Then the 2 little rascals took off, chasing each other along the rail. The deck filled again with the ship's usual noisy life. Kyle's scolding had sounded stern, but it left him with a warm feeling inside. It was that simple, unquestioning trust that kept this ship steady, like a keel beneath the waves. "Don't be too hard on them. They're only kids." Rayleigh's voice came from behind him. He appeared with a sealed bottle of rum in hand, then flipped it to Kyle with a clink. "Catch." Kyle steadied it as it came, bit the cap off with his teeth, and drank deep. The rum hit like a line of fire, burning from the throat to stomach and driving away some of the gloom that had settled over him. "I was just thinking, we went to all this trouble to fit a new mainmast for the ship." Kyle's voice was low as he watched the shipyard in the distance, where workmen strained to hoist the huge spar into place. "Do we really need to go to such lengths for a ship that's almost at its destination?" Was he talking about the ship, or about the people aboard it? Rayleigh leaned on the rail and stared out as the sun sank, throwing long shadows across the deck. "Precisely because it's the last voyage," he said quietly, "it deserves to be done right." He pushed his glasses up on his nose. The lenses flashed like cold steel. "You handled Bullet's situation very well." He hesitated, then added, "Some things aren't fitting for me," the first mate to say. "But you're different, Kyle. You're one of this ship's parents. Words from family weigh more than orders." "Family, huh?" Kyle repeated, tasting the word. His eyes flicked back toward the dark shape beneath the figurehead. A rasping laugh rolled across the deck, growing louder, as if the deck itself were trembling. "Coo-ha-ha! You 2 old geezers, what good things are you whispering about without me?" Roger strode over and grabbed Kyle and Rayleigh by the shoulders with his broad, fan-shaped hands, one on each side, almost squeezing the breath out of them. He snatched the bottle from Kyle, tilted his head back, and drained it in a few loud gulps that made Kyle's eyelids twitch. "Burp, good rum," he declared, wiping his mouth. He showed no sign of illness, only a fierce, almost solar vitality. "I heard about you, Kyle. Gave our demon descendant a proper lesson, did you? Well done. That brat needed a beating. He goes on all day about being the strongest, but he has no idea what real strength is. If being the strongest means rotting away alone in a corner, then I don't want that kind of strength." He didn't say a word about comforting Bullet, treating it as if it had been no more than a splash in the ocean during the voyage. Roger released them and pointed, eyes brighter than the setting sun, at the new mainmast being raised into place. "Look, our ship's almost repaired. Next up, the final voyage." Seeing Roger's infectious grin, the last of the gloom in Kyle's chest lifted and vanished. Captain Roger's greatest strength wasn't his haoshoku, nor his swordsmanship. It was his uncanny ability to make everyone around him forget their fear and unease, to lead them willingly to laugh with him all the way to the end, burning themselves out in a blaze of joy. He cut through the noise and guarded that peculiar innocence until the voyage was done. Perhaps that was exactly what he should be doing right now. "Hey, Roger, drink any more and you'll die sooner, you know?" Kyle snatched the rum back, tipped his head, downed the bottle in one go, and flung the empty into the sea. It struck the water with a crisp thud, like the final note of a song. Chapter 65, God Avoids Me, the Moby Dick, its bow carved like a giant whale, cut through emerald waves. On deck, the Whitebeard pirates held a boisterous feast. Barrels doubled as stools, enormous spits turned huge roasts over open flames, and raucous laughter mixed with the slap of the sea, a scene fit for rulers of the ocean. "Captains, another arm-wrestling match?" someone bellowed. "Jozu, you've gotten stronger again," another shouted back. A lookout suddenly jabbed a finger toward the horizon. "Hey, look!" he cried. "The fish! They're freaking out!" Everyone pressed to the rail. Far ahead, thousands of fish swam in a frantic exodus from the island. Silver flashes rippled beneath the surface, and in the chaos even a few small sea kings leapt from the water, thrashing as they fled. The sea around the distant isle seethed with panic. Edward Newgate's deep, booming laugh rolled across the deck. It cut through the confusion, not with force but with reassurance, an anchor of calm that steadied the restless crew at once. He sat on his private throne, a naginata resting in one hand, eyes cutting through the racket on deck as if nothing could break his focus. Across from him, Kozuki Oden, the loud, larger-than-life daimyo from Wano, was cheerfully tucking into a bowl of Oden. He squinted toward the jungle-covered island, lifted a piece of daikon with his chopsticks, blew on it, and murmured to Whitebeard, "Hey, Whitey, looks like there's an incredible guy over on that island." There was no fear in his voice, only a rising excitement. Whitebeard's grin broadened at Oden's remark. The atmosphere around them made it obvious this wasn't an ordinary person. Even young sea kings were bolting from the area, an instinctive panic that spoke of a truly formidable presence. Thatch set his roast meat down with a sigh. "Are you kidding me? Even the sea kings young are scattering. What kind of monster is this? Great, there goes tonight's seafood feast." "Marco, want to fly over and check it out?" Thatch urged. Hanging upside down from the mast, Marco let his blue flame wings flutter lazily. He waved a hand without looking down. That would be no fun. As the Moby Dick drew closer, the outline of the island sharpened, and the scene on shore began to come into focus. In the island's jungle, countless massive beasts unleashed terrified roars and fled from the interior as if something far worse than any natural predator were hunting them. They stampeded toward the beach, some even plunging straight into the sea. Thud! Whitebeard set the enormous sake bowl he had been holding down on the deck. The bottom hit wood with a dull boom that immediately smothered the distant din. "My sons, dock the ship!" he barked, then let out a booming laugh. His eyes shone with the regal interest of a man who'd found someone worthy of his attention. "Prepare to land. We'll haul that elusive fellow ashore and give him a drink." Meanwhile, on the far side of the island, a line of marine warships lay crooked on the sand, belching black smoke. Their masts were shattered, and their hulls scarred with deep gashes. Hundreds of Marines were scattered along the beach, unconscious or groaning, their will to fight utterly broken. By contrast, the Roger pirates lounged almost too casually, as if they had only been warming up. Some of the crew were even wiping their blades on the captured Marine uniforms, grumbling that this batch of opponents had been too dull. Roger had one of the captured Commodores by the collar, lifting him effortlessly until the man's face was level with his. A lazy, characteristic grin stayed on Roger's lips as he taunted, "If you want to catch me, have Garp or Sengoku show up in person." With that, he tossed the Commodore aside. The man went flying like a broken sack, rolled several times in the sand, and slumped unconscious. Roger dusted the sand off his hands and was about to call everyone in for a feast when a sharp cry split the air. "Captain! A ship! It's a ship!" Buggy, perched on a high rock with a spyglass, shrieked. "It's shaped like a whale." The Whitebeard pirates. Everyone on the beach who had just been fighting froze mid-motion. Rayleigh pushed his glasses up, peering intently through them. "Roger," he said dryly, "we just finished a fight." Roger, far from worried, only broke into a broader grin, one that looked more excited than if he'd found a treasure chest. "Whitebeard? Kuhaha! It's been a long time." Roger spun his head and bellowed toward the largest coconut tree nearby. "Hey, Kyle, don't nap on me. It's not sundown yet. Get up and get moving." Kyle, sunglasses still on, had been savoring a rare moment of peace after the fight. Roger's roar made him sigh. He peeled off the shades and sat up. Roger was already across the sand in a few strides. He clapped a huge, fan-shaped hand around Kyle's shoulder, hauled him closer, and hissed in a low voice. "Listen, Kyle, don't interfere later. That man's mine. I want a proper fight with Newgate, and I don't want anyone in the way. This could be the last time we cross swords." Kyle's mouth twitched into an "I knew it" kind of smile. What else could he say? Even with a wasting illness, the man's blood still yearned for one last adventure. He gave a perfunctory, all right, Captain, do whatever makes you happy," and let Roger's grip ease. Roger could afford to rely on his god avoidance without a second thought. Kyle had other things to worry about. The two of them were just settling into their tacit agreement when a higher-pitched shriek cut through the air. Buggy, perched on a rock, sounded near hysterical. What is that? A samurai! So fast! He's charging by himself!" On the beach, the Roger pirates all turned toward where the jungle met the sand. A figure burst out of the trees like a cannonball. He wore the garb of Wano country, wooden geta on his feet, and had two famous swords at his waist. Yet he ran with incredible speed, kicking up a straight line of dust behind him. His face was lit with wild excitement as he sprinted forward, laughing. "Ha-ha! All I have to do is snatch the treasure, right?" Behind him, the Whitebeard crew gave chase, their voices ragged with desperation. "Captain Odin, wait! Stop!" someone shouted. "Ahead, Roger's men. They're not nobodies." Kozuki Odin ignored the calls. His eyes were fixed only on the Roger pirates ahead. He drew his two blades from his waist, Ame no Habakiri and Enma, planted his feet, and pushed off, picking up another third of his speed. "Leave all your belongings behind. Leave everything." Kozuki Odin charged like an unstoppable bull, pure battle intent burning in his eyes. He paid no heed to the stunned, almost haunted looks on the faces of the Roger pirates. He simply barreled forward. A few quick-reacting crewmen roared and drew their weapons to intercept him, but Odin casually brushed them aside with a backhanded sweep of his twin blades. The steel didn't cut deep, but the force slammed several men senseless, sending them tumbling through the air and collapsing into the sand, unable to rise for a long time. "Gun, Oni," Odin laughed, Ame no Habakiri and Enma flashing in his hands like twin bolts of black lightning. He never bothered to aim at any one opponent. He intended to smash everything in his path and seize the treasure. "Is this guy a monster?" Buggy huddled behind a rock, so terrified even his famously red nose seemed to lose some color. Beside him, Jabba hefted his twin axes and turned to Rayleigh. "Stop him. Quickly, Rayleigh. If he keeps causing trouble, someone will get hurt," Jabba warned. "You're right." Rayleigh pushed his glasses up and already had his right hand on his sword hilt, a cold glint flashing beneath the lenses. Just as the two of them were about to move in to subdue the uninvited guest, a figure shot between them even faster, sending a gust of wind in their faces. "Rayleigh, Jabba, let me!" Roger called, blocking their path. He turned and flashed a grin so wide and white it was almost blinding. "I won't let you two get hurt." Rayleigh's hand on the hilt relaxed instantly. The corner of his mouth twitched almost imperceptibly. He thought, he just wants to fight, and stepped back. At the sight of another towering figure in his way, Odin only grew more excited. He raised his twin blades, haki flaring around him, eager to take on what looked to be the strongest man there. "Hello, samurai," he shouted. In the next instant, Roger drew ace and swung with fierce speed. God avoidance. A visible slash braided with black and red Haoshoku lightning ripped outward at impossible speed. It wasn't just a slash, it was a concentrated torrent of haki unleashed to the extreme. The fanatical grin on Odin's face froze, his pupils pinched shut. He didn't even have time to cross his twin blades to block before that destructive force smashed into his chest. Boom. Odin was hurled backward like a kite with a snapped string, struck squarely by an invisible giant fist. He tore through a coconut tree by the shore, then blew through 7 or 8 more sturdy palms in his wake, finally burying himself deep in a massive jungle boulder with an earth-shattering roar. Smoke and dust filled the clearing. Splinters and broken wood rained everywhere. Kyle leaned against a palm, sunglasses slipping down to the tip of his nose. He pushed them back up without a word, his thoughts sharp and cold. Good. Very spirited. Don't disgrace the Kozuki name. I won't shy away. Odin, show me what you've got. From the cracked rock came a muffled, struggling sound. Kozuki Odin staggered out, a thin trickle of blood at the corner of his mouth. He stared at his chest in disbelief, then looked up at Roger standing across the sand. What a joke. 1 strike, and he was down like that? The pain was blinding, but it didn't breed fear. It fanned a fiercer fire inside his samurai heart. Ooh! Odin let out a beastly roar. Ignoring his wounds, he pushed off with his legs and charged Roger again. Odin! Marco and the others shouted from the distance. A larger shadow suddenly swept across the beach. A thunderous, booming laughter rolled down from above. Edward Newgate's colossal form plunged toward them like a falling mountain. He didn't bother to look at his so-called brother. His hawk-like gaze was fixed on Roger. Without a word, he seized Murakumo Giri with both hands, every muscle straining, and brought it down toward Roger's head, a strike so heavy it seemed meant to cleave the island in 2. Newgate! Rang out in stunned alarm. Roger's smile widened into something feral, a joy that came from the depths of his being at finding a true opponent. Faced with a blow that could level the world, he didn't flinch or evade. He stepped forward, meeting the strike head-on. Crackle! The ground under his feet spiderwebbed into fractures. He swung his sword up to meet Whitebeard's naginata. For a heartbeat, it looked like 2 supreme-grade blades would collide. Then they didn't. They stopped dozens of centimeters apart, frozen. A far more terrifying power erupted between the weapons. Black and red Haoshoku lightning braided together, striking and writhing until a visible sphere of energy formed, shrieking like a torn throat. The sky itself seemed to split. Boom! The deafening roar was followed by an all-consuming shockwave. Violent gusts radiated outward from the 2 men, plowing the sand into a yawning chasm and uprooting trees, hurling them high into the air. Roger's elites and Whitebeard's commanders alike were thrown off balance. The weaker ones were flung outright. I can't miss this. Kyle snapped upright and stared, eyes fixed on the 2 figures at the center of the storm. The furious current sweeping toward him died away as if repelled, collapsing into a still void that left a small vacuum around him. Cough, cough! Don't mess up my hair! Someone grumbled, half joking. Slowly, the last echoes of the shockwave faded. The sky above was shredded, a ragged rent that wouldn't heal for a long while. The earth beneath them looked as if a giant had scooped out a massive bite with a spoon. A yawning, terrible crater scarred the battlefield. Around that devastation, the crews stood in solemn silence. Whether elite officers of the Roger Pirates or commanders of Whitebeard's fleet, everyone gripped their weapons and fixed their gazes on the 2 men at the center of the storm. After a single, titanic clash they had drawn apart. Roger and Whitebeard stood on cracked ground, each still holding his blade. Whitebeard's grin split his broad face, his crescent mustache curling up as always. "You're full of spirit, Roger," he rumbled. Roger had Ace slung over his shoulder, a wild, unrestrained smile lighting his features. "How long has it been, Newgate?" he called. The 2 of them broke into laughter at once, booming, infectious, the sound of old rivals reunited. Kuha! Gurarara! Their mirth rolled over the ruined plain, carrying the joy of reunion and the fullest recognition of one another's strength. It wasn't a duel between foes so much as the brutal reunion of 2 old friends who hadn't seen each other in years. Laughter died on the wind. Then, almost at the same instant and in the same uncompromising tone, the 2 sea emperors delivered the ultimate pirate greeting to one another. "Leave all your belongings behind. Leave all your belongings behind." Before he could finish his sentence, the ground beneath them detonated. In an instant, their figures blurred into after-images and they surged at one another, steel meeting steel. The sound of metal rang out like a storm, clang after clang, sparks flying, each collision whipping up small whirlwinds. "Attack, everyone!" came the shout from the Whitebeard side. Marco, the phoenix, was the first to answer. Blue flames erupted from his hands and reformed into wings. He launched into the sky with a keening cry. "Let's take everything the Roger pirates left behind," another voice hollered from behind him. Opposite them, Rayleigh pushed his glasses up. The lenses flashed as they caught the glint of blades. He unsheathed his longsword, the tip angling toward the ground. Beside him, Jabba hefted a pair of enormous axes. Their blades met with a bright, ringing clang, and his face lit up with eager excitement. Well then, Rayleigh's voice rang out, calm and steady, carrying across the Roger pirates' formation. "We can't let the captain have all the fun by himself." He and Jabba lifted their weapons at the same time, training them on the surging Whitebeard crew. All hands. Before Rayleigh could finish the order for a full assault, a figure dropped from the sky like a meteor, a soft whoosh marking his descent. He landed squarely between the two captains. Kyle stood there casually, one hand in his pocket, a black and gold naginata slung over his shoulder. The world-shattering shockwave from earlier seemed to have been nothing more than a breeze to him. "How could I miss out on such fun?" he said with a playful smile, turning his head toward Rayleigh and Jabba. Then he took a step forward. With his right fist clenched, he aimed at the vanguard, dozens of Whitebeard pirates who were charging at the front. "All right, let's open the show." He threw what looked like an ordinary punch. A few meters in front of his knuckles, the air suddenly twisted and compressed, forming a visible, rapidly rotating ring, an annular cloud of pressure and sound that spun like a living sonic boom. The compressed air erupted in an instant, boom, and an invisible shockwave fanned out, gouging a shallow trench through the sand. Dozens of pirates at the front had no time to react. The blast sent them flying like bowling pins and cleared a wide swath in an instant. "Charge!" someone shouted. The Roger pirates, ignited like dry tinder, answered with earth-shaking roars. They surged forward past Kyle, Rayleigh, and Jabba, becoming a single crushing wave as they slammed into the Whitebeard crew. Steel met steel. The battlefield exploded into chaos. "Diamond crash!" came a roar. Diamond, Jozu blazed into action. Half his body crystallized into diamond, dazzling under the sun. He crossed his arms and drove forward like an unstoppable truck, cleaving through the attackers. Ordinary Roger pirates could do nothing to stop him. They were sent tumbling. Kyle flinched at the comparison. Truck? That word stirred some unpleasant memories. Over the uproar, Jabba's booming laugh rang out. "Ha ha ha! This rock is really hard. Leave him to me." Jabba planted his feet and charged at Jozu. The two massive axes in his hands rose and fell in a deadly rhythm, whistling through the air as they struck against Jozu's diamond-hard body. Clang! The impact sent a shower of sparks flying. The force of the blow ran back through the weapons. Jabba felt a violent jolt in his tiger-like mouth and his arms went numb, but the grin on his face only widened with the thrill of the fight. Across the way, Flower Sword Vista fought with a very different grace. His long sword moved light and fluid, each sweep sending a cascade of delicate rose petals into the air. Beautiful as it was, the display carried a lethal edge. "Flower Sword, Tuberose," he called, and razor-sharp petals filled the space, cutting off any escape for several of the Roger pirates who were caught in its path. Then a silver flash pierced the petal storm. Clink, 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 one by one, the petals were deflected with crisp, precise strikes. Rayleigh had appeared between the crew and the oncoming blades. He stood calmly, casually twirling his own longsword, his eyes cool behind his glasses as he watched Vista's blade work. "Good swordsmanship," Rayleigh said in that same calm, even tone. "But your opponent is me." Vista's face tightened. The man standing before him radiated a pressure that was almost impossible to measure. Simply being there made the air feel heavier. In one corner of the battlefield, two young rascals stood back to back, panting. "Shanks, big guy on your left!" Buggy shouted over his shoulder. "I know, Buggy, you idiot, that's the right," Shanks barked, but his anger didn't waver his grip. He met the scimitar aimed at the back of Buggy's head with a precise parry. "You're so annoying, red-haired bastard, take this," Buggy snapped. "Who are you calling red hair, red nose?" Shanks shot back. They argued like children, but their teamwork was seamless. Thanks to Kyle's special training, their strength had long since outgrown what it used to be. In a clash this large, they could defend themselves without trouble and even launch the occasional counterstrike. Farther in, deep among the trees, Kozuki Odin, who had been hurled away by Roger's god avoidance, staggered back into the fray. He wiped blood from the corner of his mouth. And the look on his face was not one of defeat, but of growing excitement. An unprecedented grand melee erupted around them, and he threw his head back with a thunderous laugh. Oh, this is what real pirates are like. This is brilliant. Ignoring the shouts of his own men, he hefted Ame no Habakiri and Inma and charged into the fray like a tiger among sheep, slashing without discrimination. Friend and foe alike fell under the blades, turning the battlefield into an even wilder storm of violence. "Hey, samurai, you're cutting your own people," someone yelled. "Captain Odin, that's Roger over there. Watch out," another cried. At the eye of the chaos, Kyle walked as if on a leisurely stroll. His observation haki, combined with his wave motion vision, had already stretched across the entire battlefield. He could sense and foresee every blade and bullet aimed his way. Any attack meant for him would be seen a beat ahead and easily avoided. A cyan afterimage cleaved the air and descended with a sharp whoosh. Marco, the phoenix, dove in. In mid-flight he shifted to his half-human, half-bird form, talons extended, tipped with armament haki and wrapped in an azure, regenerative flame, and hurled himself for Kyle's head. "You're the wave motion king, aren't you?" he howled, claws flashing. "Let me see what you're made of." Marco's words were half taunt, half challenge as he moved, so fast an ordinary eye would only catch a streak of light. He lunged with razor claws, a blur descending toward Kyle. Kyle barely lifted his chin, a small smile curled beneath his sunglasses. He didn't block or dodge. He opened his mouth and sent a silent pulse toward Marco. The instant Marco's claws were about to connect, his mind spasmed as if a red-hot poker had been driven into his skull. Then his own voice erupted inside his head, a demonic refrain that sliced through his thoughts, looping and warping until it became a grinding, unbearable noise. "You're the wave motion king, aren't you? Let me see what you're made of. Made of, made of, made of." That absurd, invasive assault froze Marco, his speed and razor focus stuttering for a few tenths of a second. When masters clash, a fight is decided in an instant. That tiny sliver of vulnerability was all Kyle needed. By the time Marco blinked the spell away, Kyle's figure had already vanished from where he'd been. Riding the recoil of the shockwave, Kyle materialized beside Marco like a ghost. Nice reflexes, but he curled his middle finger and with a merciless snap flicked at the back of Marco's head, aiming high enough to graze the forehead. Marco's observation haki flared wildly, raising the hairs on his arms. Rely had time to think. He twisted his body at the last instant and slammed his wings, sheathed in armament haki, up to block. There was a dull, bone-shuddering thud, and the force sent him skidding backward over 10 meters, carving 2 deep furrows into the earth. He staggered, wings vibrating from the impact, a numbness crawling through them. For the first time, his expression toward Kyle was serious. "A mental attack, huh? That's a troublesome ability." Kyle didn't press the advantage. He smoothed his wind-tussled collar and said, casual, "Mutual." Then he smiled and extended his right hand. His thumb and forefinger came together, almost touching. Only a sliver of space remained between them. "The difference between you and me," he said, "is this much." Something flickered into existence in that sliver of space. Tiny, impossible. The fingertip universe. Marco's eye twitched. "This guy, is he trying to humiliate me?" He drew a steady breath. The blue flames licking his skin flared higher, and his aura swelled, more intense than before. "Is that so? Then I'll turn that finger of yours, and your arrogance, into ash." Heh? Looks like he's getting worked up. Chapter 68. Face-Changing. This duel, later embroidered by chroniclers and journalists of many generations, lasted 3 days and 3 nights. By day, 2 pirate crews that represented the pinnacle of naval might tore into one another in a raw, primal contest of strength across the island. Roger's godlike strikes met Whitebeard's quake-bringing tremor fruit powers blow for blow. Rayleigh's flashing swordplay braided with Marco's blue phoenix flames, and Jabba's great axe clashed against Jozu's diamond-hard body in a thunderous metal symphony. Shockwaves of haki rent and reshaped the island's center again and again, With each titanic collision, the sky itself seemed to shift colors. When night fell, an unspoken agreement quietly took hold. The fighting stopped as abruptly as it had begun. Both sides withdrew to their camps and lit bonfires. The enemies who had spent the day trying to kill one another now raised their wine cups across a giant crater. "Hey, Newgate, got any wine left over there?" Roger called across the distance. "Grah! If you want it, come and get it yourself, Roger." Whitebeard thundered back, and laughter rolled across the ruined landscape. What followed was almost miraculous. A member of the Roger pirates, clutching an arm wound, trudged into Whitebeard's camp, not for a duel, but simply to trade for a fresh bandage. From the other side, Thatch swaggered across the no-man's land, carrying a platter of fragrant roasted sea beast meat, his one aim to swap it for a bottle of Roger's potent West Blue liquor. By the third day at dusk, when Roger and Whitebeard met again, and their blows sent each other staggering, they both erupted into laughter. The ridiculous little war had quietly turned into an even more ridiculous banquet. The old rule about leaving all possessions behind had degenerated into an all-out gift exchange. 666. Change faces. Don't lose your beans, someone bawled, a nonsensical cheer that only made the moment funnier. "Ha! Newgate, I'll gladly take that broken gun you swiped from the Marines," Roger declared, tossing a wildly ornate flintlock over his shoulder. Its muzzle was still studded with absurd glittering gems. He threw his head back and roared, "Gurahaha! This hat of yours is perfect. Odin could use it for a bowl," Whitebeard said, plopping a captured Marine officer's cap onto Kazuki Odin's head. Odin answered with one of his characteristic booming ooh-ooh cries, a sound that only made the others laugh harder. Despite the cuts and bandages, the crew was radiant. They linked arms, exchanging food, fine wine, and various borrowed trophies from the opposing ship. Boasts ricocheted around the deck, only to be immediately punctured by louder, truer retorts. Men wrestled one another for sport until their crewmates dragged them apart and shoved cups of sake into their hands. It was loud and chaotic, but under the noise there was a simple, effortless harmony. Up in a thick tree branch, Kyle sat with his legs swinging, an apple, probably stolen, clutched in one hand. He watched the scene below with the delighted attention of someone watching the best play in the world. This was piracy at its purest, strong, free, unrestrained. They clashed without malice and reconciled without artifice. That, Kyle thought, was Roger's true magic. He drew in men as raw and honest as Whitebeard, monsters in their own way who fit together perfectly. Kyle's gaze drifted from Roger and Whitebeard, who sat laughing on top of a giant mushroom, and finally landed on a group of youngsters at the edge of the banquet. A silent standoff held the space between them. Kyle realized belatedly, "Isn't that Blackbeard?" Marshal D. Teach stood at the fringe of the Whitebeard pirates' encampment with his arms folded, his face set in a grave expression. His eyes cut across the bonfire and the crowd, locked on two figures on the other side, Shanks and Buggy. "Captain Marco," Teach said in a low voice, never taking his eyes off the pair. "Those two on Roger's ship, the red-haired one and the red-nosed Buggy, are they apprentice crew members?" Marco followed his line of sight and yawned lazily. "Ah, those are Shanks and Buggy. They've been with the ship a long time, practically veterans." Teach narrowed his eyes. "Is that so?" He studied them for a long beat. "They don't look very strong." Across the fire, however, the mood couldn't have been more different. "Hey, Shanks." Buggy leaned in close and lowered his voice as if he were about to spill a world-shaking secret. "Did you see that guy with the hat over there?" Shanks answered without much interest. "Yeah, I saw him. What about him?" Buggy's face went pale. Even his red nose seemed to glow a shade darker. His voice dropped to a whisper, trembling, "He hasn't slept at all for the past 3 nights. Shanks shrugged. "Not sleeping? So what? Are you proud of that? Are you an idiot?" Buggy snapped, stamping his foot. His tone sharpened. "That's not the point. I heard someone from Whitebeard's ship say that he's never slept his whole life. Since he was born. They said it's like he doesn't need to sleep. His life is twice as long as everyone else's." He glanced over at Teach with the fearful awe you'd reserve for a monster. "He's a monster, Shanks." Shanks froze for a moment and scratched his head, as if struggling to take in what Buggy was saying. What neither of them realized was that, across the standoff, The man they were talking about, the future emperor known as Blackbeard, Marshal D. Teach, was, despite his bluster and abrasive manner, under an enormous amount of psychological pressure. Teach stood with his arms folded, a bead of cold sweat forming on his forehead. He couldn't take his eyes off Buggy, that red-nosed man, and a storm was building inside him. Why is he staring at me all the time? Teach thought. He's been watching me since the first night. He was still watching me the second night. Now it's the third day, and he hasn't stopped. Not even a blink. That look on his face makes it feel like he's uncovered some huge secret. The hairs on the back of Teach's neck prickled. Kyle, watching from the side, was on the verge of bursting out laughing at the ridiculousness of it all. Buggy, meanwhile, was thinking the exact same thing. That person opposite me is terrifying. He hasn't slept for 3 days and nights. Teach mirrored the thought in his own head. That person opposite me is terrifying. He's been staring at me for 3 days and nights. The two of them simply stared at one another, each convinced that the other was the more frightening of the pair. Kyle's grin widened. A once-in-a-century showdown between 3 future Yonko had somehow dissolved into pure chaos. 2 clowns at the bonfire, one trying to frighten himself, the other genuinely spooked, stared at each other across the flames, producing a ridiculous, precarious balance. Kyle was about to savor the absurdity a little longer when his observation hockey pricked up. Something in the air had changed. Above the raucous banquet, 3 figures converged on the giant mushroom that had survived the hockey clash at the island's center: Roger, Whitebeard, and Kazuki Odin. The presence of the 3 men cut through the noise below, creating a quiet sphere that belonged only to them. Kyle arched an eyebrow, and without a sound leapt to a nearby branch. From there he watched, careful not to disturb anything. On the wide cap of the mushroom, Roger, uncharacteristically grave, dropped his usual carefree smile. From beneath his coat he produced a large rubbing, and with care unfolded it between the 3 of them. It was a rubbing of a poneglyph. The ancient, enigmatic characters on the paper seemed to hum with a strange power in the sunlight. Whitebeard set his sake gourd aside. His massive frame leaned forward, eyes sharp as an eagle's as he scrutinized the rubbing laid out before him. When Kazuki Odin saw the characters, the drunken boisterousness drained from his face in an instant. In its place came a complicated expression of surprise and recognition. Odin. Roger's voice was low and resonant, threaded with an excitement he could barely keep in check. Can you really read these characters? Odin tore his gaze away from the rubbing, scratched his head, and answered matter-of-factly, I can read them. But this is a cipher passed down through the Kazuki family for generations. Roger, where did you get something like this? A cipher? Roger blinked, stunned for a moment, then wild joy swept over his features. As long as you can read it, as long as you can read it. He drew a deep breath to steady himself. Newgate, Odin. He sat cross-legged, letting his eyes travel over his old friend and rival. Do you know what this could mean? The log pose has only ever pointed us as far as one place, Lodestar Island. Whitebeard's pupils narrowed. Kazuki Odin's eyes widened. He'd been desperate to go to sea, but he didn't fully understand the ultimate aims of navigation. Still, from the grave look on Roger and Whitebeard's faces, he could feel the weight behind those words. If the log pose had reached its end, didn't that mean they'd already circumnavigated the world? But, Roger's voice changed suddenly, edged with both defiance and excitement. That isn't the true end. He leaned forward. We found that the log pose stops working there. To push beyond and reach the real final island, to do what no one has ever done, we need a different kind of compass. He tapped the rubbing laid out before them with a heavy finger. This. Roger's eyes blazed as if lit from within. There are 4 red road poneglyphs in the world. If we find them, decode what's written, and plot the 4 points on a sea chart so their lines intersect, the spot where they meet is the location of that legendary final island, Roger said. If we get there, he added, his voice swelling until each word struck like a drumbeat, we'll be the undisputed greatest pirate crew in the world. When his voice faded, a heavy silence settled over the great mushroom. Edward Whitebeard Newgate stood frozen. Ever since the God Valley incident, he had chased something other than fame. He had chased family. but even he couldn't miss the magnitude of what Roger had just revealed. This was more than an adventure. It was a path to the world's deepest secret, the highest prize a pirate could claim. The idea alone was enough to set the world aflame. Kazuki Oden's jaw hung open. He'd always thought going to sea meant meeting new people and seeing new things, but never had he imagined that at the end of this vast ocean there could be a secret so grand. For a long moment, Hikua did not find the words. Then, feeling the blood race hotly through his veins, he knew he could never be satisfied with anything less than the chase Roger had just set before them. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Roger turned to Whitebeard, and for the first time his face grew solemn and grave. Newgate. He rose and spoke to Whitebeard with quiet urgency. I need your help. To reach that place, to unlock the greatest secret in the world, lend me Oden for 1 year. Whitebeard's brow tightened, and a pressure of haki flared out from him. Kazuki Oden was his blood, his family. The idea of simply handing him over was affronting. Roger, are you trying to steal my crew? His voice rumbled. No. Roger's answer was immediate and earnest. I'm only asking. There was a humility to his words that cut through his usual swagger. This was a man who wouldn't bow even to the fleet admiral, but now, for the sake of a lifelong dream, he unconsciously shifted, knees as if ready to bend. He was willing to swallow every scrap of pride and humble himself before his greatest rival. Just as he was about to make that staggering gesture, the corner of his eye caught a sight below. Kazuki Oden, casually reclining on a tree branch, watching them with an easy, leisurely air. Kyle leaned against the trunk, one hand propping his chin. His eyes, shaded behind dark sunglasses, were as still and clear as a pond, neither surprised nor dissuading, simply watching. There was no anger there, and no encouragement either. Instead, his expression acted like a mirror, reflecting back Roger's truest self, a king on the verge of ascending the throne. How could a king kneel? Even a request should be made in the posture of a king. The thought struck Roger like a shock. His knees, which had begun to bend, snapped rigid. He drew himself up, and the supplicant's posture vanished. Where there had been pleading, a composed dignity took its place, neither servile nor haughty. He was still asking, but the nature of the ask had changed. It was no longer the desperate plea of a dreamer begging a stronger man. It was a solemn summons from a sovereign about to make history, addressed to a rival he respected. Newgate, Roger said, his voice calm and overflowing with authority. I, Gol D, Roger, ask this of you. Let Oden sail with me for 1 year. In that year he will see the greatest treasure in the world, and I will personally return him to you unharmed. His gaze met Whitebeard's directly, steady and unflinching. I only received a 2-sentence fragment. To revise the whole chapter I'll need the full text. Please paste the chapter here. In the meantime, here's a polished version of the lines you sent. Please, he cried, the last 3 words ringing out with crystalline clarity, force, and conviction. If you paste the rest of the chapter, I'll rewrite it in fluent, idiomatic English, while preserving all plot points, characters, and details. If you have any style preferences, faithful to original tone, more dramatic, more subtle, length constraints, etc., tell me, and I'll follow them. Kyle muttered under his breath. Phew, the tsundere part. The boisterous drunken revelry that had surrounded Whitebeard evaporated the instant Roger's request hung in the air. It was replaced by a suffocating silence, heavy and deep as the ocean. Roger's words had echoed cleanly across the mushroom cap, each syllable clear and bright, yet they seemed to fall into a bottomless void, unanswered. A low, humorless chuckle rumbled up from Whitebeard's chest. Gurararara! And the sound made the air itself feel thick and viscous. With a contemptuous scoff, he crushed his wine bottle in his hand. Glass shattered, liquor sprayed in all directions. What a joke! His laugh turned to a roar like sudden thunder. He slammed his massive hand down beside him with a booming crack. The impact sent a violent shockwave across the mushroom's surface, spiderwebbing hairline fractures across the improbably tough cap. The whole dome shuddered. The noise of the feast below was swallowed by that fury, and from his perch on a nearby branch, Kyle could plainly see white arcs of air tearing apart like glass. A blast of Conqueror's haki, thick with white-hot fury, shot into the sky and rent the evening light on the horizon. Roger! Whitebeard rose slowly to his feet. His already mountain-like frame seemed to grow taller still, and the shadow he cast swallowed both Roger and Odin. "Are you trying to steal my family from me?" He spat the word family like a curse, each syllable carrying the weight to tear the sea itself. Roger held his ground under the onslaught of pressure, unmoving. He understood Whitebeard's rage, had even expected it, but there was no room for compromise. Kozuki Odin, however, was somewhere else entirely. Roger's words had opened a magnificent vista inside him. His thoughts churned like a placid lake struck by a titanic stone, sending towering waves racing outward. Final Island, the secret code the Kozuki line had guarded for generations. Why could I, of all people, read these writings? Why had I ever left the isolated land of Wano? Why had my path led me to meet these men on this very sea? Is this fate? A sudden surge of fate and purpose welled up in his chest like a volcanic blast, making his blood run hot. He glanced at Roger, then at the furious Whitebeard, a powerful impulse nearly knocking him off balance. "Whitey," Kozuki Odin said before he could stop himself, his voice trembling with excitement. "Let me go." He wheeled to face Whitebeard, his eyes shining with a desperate new light. "I want to see it. I want to see what that final island really looks like." Whitebeard's huge frame froze. Slowly he lowered his head to look at his brother, conflict written all over his features. Anger flared in his golden eyes, but his mouth fell in a reluctant twist that showed equal parts betrayal and hurt. "How can you ask that?" His voice was low, barely held in. "Odin, you and I are brothers." Odin met the look without flinching. "Just 1 year, Whitey." "Not even a year," Whitebeard snapped, clenching his fists and swinging them hard at his sides. 2 shockwaves cut through the air with dull, thunderous pops. He turned his head away as if he couldn't bear the sight of Odin's eager face. "On my ship, no family member gets off halfway." The words hung in the air like a gavel. Roger said nothing. He only watched. This was a family matter between Newgate and Odin. Outsiders had no right to interfere. All he could do was wait for whatever would happen next. Odin stared at Whitebeard's broad back, as immovable as a mountain, drew a long breath, and then dropped to his knees. His forehead struck the cracked surface of the giant mushroom cap with a hard blow. "Please, Whitey," he begged. The plea carried everything he felt, sincerity and longing, guilt and the painful reluctance he bore toward his elder brother. Whitebeard's barrel chest shuddered under the weight of it, but he didn't turn. Up on the mushroom, time seemed to stretch. Only the wind moved. From far below, the faint noise of the feast filtered up, making the silo, ends here, feel even heavier. Minutes passed. The fury that had radiated from Whitebeard, an anger that could have shaken heaven and earth, slowly ebbed like a receding tide. He said nothing, neither consenting nor refusing. At last he took a few slow, heavy steps, walked to the far side of the mushroom, and leaped down, landing back in his camp with a single thud. He hardly needed to say anything. The gesture said it all. Roger exhaled in relief, and a genuine smile spread across his face. He walked over and clapped Odin, who was still kneeling, on the shoulder. "Come on, Odin. Don't keep Newgate waiting too long." Odin looked up, his eyes rimmed with red, and gave a heavy nod. Kyle snorted from the side. "Pfft! The Sundere Act!" Once word got around that Kozuki Odin would be sailing with the Roger pirates for a year, the Whitebeard crew was in an uproar. The farewell wasn't the mournful scene anyone had pictured. It felt more like a rowdy send-off. Voices rang out all at once. "Captain Odin, don't you dare die out there! You bastard! If you don't come back, we'll go to Captain Roger's ship, tie you up, and bring you back ourselves." Marco, hands in his pockets, approached and handed Odin a small parcel. "The ship's doctor insisted I give you this," he said. "Special wound medicine. It's powerful. Use it sparingly," Yozu grunted, clapping Odin on the back. "And whatever you see out there, make a record of it and tell us when you get back." Thatch shoved a huge bento into Odin's hands. "Just grilled some Sea King leg. This will feed you for 2 days, no kidding." Odin laughed, swapping jokes and bumping fists with each brother as they hugged him, committing their warnings and gifts to memory. With Ame no Habakiri and Enma at his side, he stepped toward the Oro Jackson, weaving through the crowd that had gathered to see him off. He glanced back, expecting the familiar massive figure among the onlookers, but he wasn't where Odin expected. "Hey, where's Whitebeard Pops?" someone whispered. "There, he's sitting over there." Everyone turned. Whitebeard sat alone on a raised, specially made seat in the center of the camp, his back turned to the departing crew. He said nothing, only lifted a cup to his lips now and then, drinking as if the farewell had nothing to do with him. He still looked sullen. Odin hesitated for a moment. A shadow of sadness crossed his face. Then, almost at once, he forced a smile and kept walking. Odin bowed deeply toward Whitebeard's back, then squared his shoulders and stepped onto the deck of the Oro Jackson. He disappeared into the ship's cabin before the Whitebeard crew could do anything more than watch. Once his silhouette was gone, the men of the Whitebeard pirates drifted back to their captain. "Pops, aren't you going to see Captain Odin off?" someone asked. "Humph." Whitebeard let out a cold snort and took another long swallow of wine. At that moment, a crew member came racing up, eyes wide, lugging an enormous chest. "Pops! Pops! Look!" he cried, flinging the lid open like presenting a prize. The chest gleamed with gold, berries, and jewels. "That Roger fellow said he left this to thank us. He sent food and good wine, too." The crew burst into whoops and cheers. Whitebeard froze mid-drink, then suddenly barked at the messenger so loudly it made everyone wince. "What are you standing around for?" The boy flinched at the shout, bewildered by the sudden outburst. Whitebeard grabbed a large wooden tub brimming with grilled meat and fruit, jabbed it toward the docks, puffed out his beard, and glared as he barked. "Send that food back, now! How could those bastards not know how to look after people? What if Odin gets hungry?" A crewman snapped back. "Yes, sir." 71. Odin Night. The Oro Jackson surged forward, its sails billowing as the ship left the Whitebeard pirates behind. On deck, members of the Roger crew watched the retreating flag while a very conspicuous guest inspected every inch of the vessel. Kozuki Odin was like an animal let loose after a long captivity, every sight and sound a new wonder. One moment he was sprinting to the bow, letting the sea wind whip through his long hair as if posing for some heroic picture. The next he had sidled up next to the helmsman, fingers spread over the complicated rudder and pointing excitedly at the chart. "Oh, oh, oh!" he kept exclaiming, eyes shining. His enthusiasm was infectious and a little overwhelming, an unstoppable, blustering energy that drew stares. The Roger crew, however, didn't crowd him. They hovered at the edges like people wary of a sudden downpour, not wanting to get swept up in whatever whirlwind he was. It wasn't hostility so much as caution. Odin's exuberance could be intense. "Hey, Shanks," Buggy whispered from behind the mainmast, peering out with the wide-eyed curiosity of someone trying not to be noticed. "Is that guy really going to sail with us for a whole year?" Shanks chewed on a blade of grass, hands clasped behind his head, but his eyes never left the samurai. Calm as ever, he spat a short laugh. "Captain Roger went and brought him aboard himself," he said. "If Roger personally fetched him, you can't exactly call it fake. He doesn't look like a pirate at all, more like a country bumpkin who's never left home," someone muttered. "He's a captain on Whitebeard's ship," Jabba replied, leaning against the rail as he wiped the blood from his twin axes. "Someone Whitebeard would call brother. He can't be simple." His tone was calm, but his eyes were hawk-sharp, tracking Odin's every move. As a veteran of the crew, Jabba had seen countless dangerous people, but Odin's bright, almost innocent air felt completely wrong for someone described as a fearsome commander under Whitebeard. "Honestly, he looks like an idiot," Kyle said, lounging in a deck chair with sunglasses hiding most of his face. A faint smile tugged at his lips as he watched the silent rounds of what everyone had taken to calling the new recruit observation. The crew's open distrust and Odin's total obliviousness made for a quietly absurd little tableau. The awkward standoff broke when the Oro Jackson pulled into a thriving commercial island. "Wow! What a lively town!" Odin was the first to leap down onto the pier. The scabbards of Ame no Habakiri and Enma at his waist clinked together with each eager step, the metal chiming crisply like a bell announcing his arrival. He glanced around the deck, eyes bright, then turned back to the crew and shouted, "Everyone, to celebrate my boarding, today I'll treat you to the supreme delicacy of my homeland, Wano, Odin." Without waiting for anyone to respond, he bolted ashore like a gust of wind through the bustling market. "Odin." Buggy and Shanks exchanged puzzled looks, their faces full of confusion. Jabba sighed, hung his axe back on his hip, and called after them, "Go see what he's up to. Don't let him get into trouble. Kazuki Odin moved with large, confident strides, weaving through the stalls as if he owned the place. He stopped at a vegetable stand, scooped up a handful of oversized daikon, and grinned at the vendor. Perfect, he declared. At a tofu shop, he grabbed several pieces of freshly fried tofu and clapped the proprietor on the shoulder. Excellent work, he kept going. Fish cakes, konnyaku noodles, bundles of kelp, picking things up, offering a hearty thank you, and then turning away, apparently unconcerned with paying. To Odin, sharing good food was simply natural. Ingredients, in his mind, were meant to be taken and turned into a feast. The vendors he'd patronized were stunned at first, then fury took over. Feet stomped, voices rose, and curses flew. Hey, that samurai! Stop right there! Thief! Someone's stealing without paying. Jabba brought a hand to his forehead, feeling a headache coming on. Shanks and Buggy stood frozen. Buggy's jaw practically hit the ground. Is this guy really an idiot? He cried. From alleys and street corners, a group of burly men, clearly no good, closed in. They wore plain clothes, but their forearms were covered in tattoos, their eyes were fierce, and their belts bulged with the kind of gear local thugs carried. A scar-faced man at the front stepped out and blocked Odin's path, grinning like he enjoyed trouble. Hey, outsider, you taking things on this street. Did you ask us first? Odin stopped, balancing a large bundle of ingredients in his arms, and scratched his head, genuinely puzzled. Huh? I just wanted to borrow some ingredients to make a delicious Odin for everyone. Isn't that something to be happy about? Happy? The scar-faced man barked a laugh, as if the idea were the biggest joke he'd ever heard. You taking us for fools? Brothers, show him what the rules are. The leader barked. Before he finished, 7 or 8 burly men flashed grins and drew the machetes and iron rods they'd been hiding behind their backs, surging forward. Jabba sighed and shook his head, helpless, but he didn't intervene. Instead, he looked to Shanks and Buggy. Shanks and Buggy exchanged a quick glance and, almost without thinking, stepped forward. They both found Odin odd, but now that he wore the name of the Roger Pirates, they weren't going to let a gang of low-level thugs push him around. You boys looking for trouble? Shanks said, drawing his cutlass and planting his small frame between Odin and the attackers. Don't mess with the great me, Buggy crowed, pulling out several throwing knives and crouching into a fighting stance. Odin blinked at the 2 little figures who'd moved to block him, then broke into laughter. Oh ho, you 2 want in? This just got interesting. He gently set the bundle of ingredients he'd been carrying on the ground and gripped the twin swords at his waist, ready. Gun, mimic demon. A flash of brilliant sword light cut the air. The 2 thugs at the front didn't even see it coming before a tremendous force slammed into them, sending them flying and toppling a row of market stalls. Wow, incredible! Shanks' eyes lit up. He leapt in, sword flashing, and flawlessly parried a downward cleaver. Don't underestimate us. Buggy's throwing knives traced wicked arcs through the air, scattering several attackers into a panicked retreat. Seeing the opening, Jabba smiled and waded in. He swung his twin axes in wide, crushing arcs. Each blow threw back gusts of wind, and no one could get near him. It wasn't a fight so much as a massacre. Odin's swordplay was broad and devastating. Jabba stood immovable like a mountain, and the young Shanks and Buggy moved together with a practiced, deadly coordination far beyond ordinary fighters. In less than 5 minutes, the street was littered with moaning, defeated gang members. Odin sheathed his swords, turned to the 3 who had fought at his side, and flashed a radiant smile. You're strong! Ha! Shanks and Buggy were breathless, but their faces were lit with excitement. Fighting shoulder to shoulder had banished the last of their wariness toward this strange samurai. Jabba, wiping an imaginary speck of dust from his axe blade, gave a grunt of approval. That night, a huge iron pot was set up on the deck of the Oro Jackson. Odin happily took the role of head chef, laying out the ingredients they'd gathered during the day and dropping them into the simmering, fragrant broth one by one. He'd slowly brewed the stock with sea fish and kelp, the very soul of a proper Odin. Before long, the ship was suffused with the scent of sweet daikon, savory fish cakes, and rich soy broth. Can you really eat this stuff? Buggy peered into the pot, suspicious of the unfamiliar mix of ingredients. You'll know when you taste it, Odin replied. Roger was the first to grab a bowl. Odin ladled out a generous serving, and Roger ate with obvious relish, downing the soup along with the solids. This daikon soaked in the broth is perfect. One by one, the crew crowded around the steaming pots. Wow, these fish cakes are so springy. This tofu, it just melts in your mouth. Buggy and Shanks were practically devouring everything, faces gleaming with oil and words tumbling out between mouthfuls. Jabba ate more quietly, bowl in hand, a look of contentment on his face. Kyle took a bowl as well, and Odin ladled him a generous helping. He lifted a translucent slice of daikon to his lips. As the warm broth hit his tongue, the familiar, gently sweet, savory flavor bloomed, and he paused for a moment. How long had it been since he'd tasted this? There was a small, indistinct ache to it, part nostalgia, part something else he couldn't name. The feast went on late into the night. Odin was surrounded by crewmen, drinking heavily, singing loudly, and flinging his arms around as he told colorful tales of Wano. Shanks and Buggy took to following him like loyal disciples, calling him Big Brother Odin at every turn. Roger, with his arms slung over Odin's shoulders, drank his fill and then glanced across at Kyle, who sat apart savoring his Odin in silence. Roger's grin only grew broader. On the deck, the clink of glasses, boisterous laughter, and the steaming pot of Odin blended together, sweeping away the last traces of awkwardness that had come with the new arrival. From that day on, Kozuki Odin was no longer a borrowed tool. He was a true member of the Roger Pirates. 72. Sky Island. The steam rising from Odin had barely died away when the Oro Jackson slipped into a strange stretch of sea. The air was unnaturally still. The sky felt oppressively low. The clouds piled so thick and pale they looked like solidified cream. Captain, is this thing broken? Kozuki Odin crouched over the compass and jabbed the glass cover with an impatient finger. The needle, which should have been pointing toward their next island, was stubbornly aimed straight up at the sky. Broke, Odin, that's exactly how it's supposed to be. Roger strode up, clapped him on the shoulder, and nodded toward the sunless ceiling of cloud. It's telling us our next stop is up there. Up there? Odin's mouth fell open as if he'd swallowed a rice ball. He craned his neck to stare at the clouds in disbelief. Roger's face grew serious as the air thickened and a dampness settled over the deck. Everyone, get ready! Stow the sails and lash everything down. At his command, the crew moved as one, some hauling sails down, while others lashed cargo and secured loose gear, their actions quick and practiced as the Oro Jackson pressed on beneath that heavy, mysterious sky. Shanks and Buggy, the two apprentices, nervously checked the ropes that ran from the railing to the belts around their waists. Hey, Buggy, are we really going to be launched into the sky? Are we going to die? Shanks's voice trembled. Shut up. I, the great Buggy, am not dying in some hellhole like this. Buggy barked, but his words were all bluff. His face was pale and his legs shook. He jabbed a finger and forced a laugh. If anyone's going to go first, it'll be you, Redhead, he added, tightening another loop of rope around his waist. Not long after, the ocean around the Oro Jackson began to move. The once calm water started to spin, centering on the ship and opening into a vast, churning whirlpool. At the whirlpool's heart, the surface dropped away as if some invisible giant had pressed a hand into the sea. From the depths, an indescribable, terrifying force suddenly surged upward. Here it comes, Roger bellowed, white-knuckling the helm. Then, boom, with a deafening roar, a gigantic pillar of water, hundreds of meters across, shot skyward from the whirlpool's center, carrying a violent, howling current with it. The Oro Jackson rode the upwelling like a leaf in a waterfall, snatched and hurled high into the sky by that mighty current. The ship lurched and rolled so violently it felt like it might tear itself apart. And still the value of the atom treasure tree kept rising. Wah! We're gonna die! We're gonna die! Shouts from Shanks and Buggy were nearly shredded by the gale. The two boys clung to the railing, faces plastered with snot and tears, utterly disheveled. The rest of the crew looked no better, pale, clinging to the railings and masts, groaning as if their organs had been tossed inside them. Nazdan, Sanbel, stop swaying, you two. Someone barked from the deck, hanging on with white-knuckled fingers. If you two go overboard, we're finished. Nazdan and Sanbel, those two hulking meat mountains in the ship's center, stood rooted like boulders. The gale couldn't even make them stagger. Nozdon's sheer weight was a comfort to everyone. For once, not an ounce of him felt wasted. Still, his round, normally open face had gone seaweed green, and he clenched his jaw against the nausea. In a muffled, strained voice, he managed to reply, "Don't worry. This level of wind, Nozdon started, but he never finished. Suddenly he doubled over and vomited in a perfect arc across the deck. The sight made the crew's faces go even grimmer. The ship itself groaned under the strain, timbers creaking as if it might come apart. Then someone crossed the heaving deck as if it were level ground. In only a few bounds, he was up on the dragon head of the figurehead. "Vortex, Azure Dragon Twister," he cried. Kyle swung his naginata down in a vicious arc. An invisible ripple pulsed out from the blade's center. In the next instant, the terrifying pagan column of water, the kind that could shear a ship in two, was suddenly disciplined, as if handled by divine hands. The water rolled and braided itself into a long, sinuous body. Flying spray hardened into shimmering scales. The roaring whirl coalesced into a fierce dragon head. The previously chaotic torrents and gusting air began to spin in a line, spiraling around the Orojackson's hull until a lifelike water dragon wrapped itself about the ship. The water dragon roared, its long body forming the most stable track the ship could hope for. Its scales shielded the deck from the raging winds. The violent shaking of the hull stopped as abruptly as it had begun, replaced by a steady, high-speed ascent. Silence fell over the deck. Shanks and Buggy stopped screaming and stood frozen, staring at the magnificent dragon of seawater coiled around the Orojackson, their mouths wider than even Odin's had been earlier. "Are you kidding me?" Buggy's voice was flat. He even forgot to wipe the smear across his face. Shanks could only stammer, "Amazing!" There was more than shock in his eyes, an almost worshipful awe. Kazuki Odin's smile disappeared. He stared, stunned, at the man standing on the dragon's head, commanding the storm like a god, and felt a tempest surge in his chest. Controlling the sea. Could such a thing really be possible? Jabba and Rayleigh exchanged a look, each reading the same approval in the other's face. Roger broke into a booming, exhilarated laugh. "Well done, Kyle. This is a lot more impressive than just powering up." The water dragon coiled once more, lifting the Orojackson with a solemn, majestic dignity, and shot straight into the sky. Before anyone aboard the ship had a chance to catch their breath after Kyle's miraculous move, the dragon's head rent the thick, seemingly eternal cloud layer in two, tearing open an enormous hole. Blinding sunlight poured through, instantly driving away the damp chill the upwelling current had brought with it. Everyone squinted instinctively. When they opened their eyes again, the deck fell deathly silent. Below them spread an endless ocean of pure white clouds, smooth and limitless. Floating above that snowy sea was a lush green island, eerily still. The trees that crowned it were oddly spherical, like giant green lanterns, and the buildings had an architectural style nothing like the blue sea, ancient, solemn, and almost sacred in feeling. "Hey, Shanks, pinch me," Buggy whispered, lips trembling, his eyes round and unblinking. Shanks didn't hesitate. He raised his hand and slapped the back of Buggy's head hard. "Ow!" Buggy yelped, clutching his head and shooting Shanks an accusing glare. "You actually did it!" "You told me to pinch you," Shanks shot back, half indignant, but his attention was already snagged by the sight ahead. He let out a soft, awed murmur. So, there really is a sky island. Under Kyle's control, the Orojackson settled gently onto the cloud sea. The ship's hull pressed into the clouds, sending ripples outward like a vessel easing into a harbor, then came to a slow, steady stop. The water dragon that had circled them completed its task, giving a low, resonant roar before its form quietly dissolved into mist and drifted up to blend with the heavens. Kyle sheathed his naginata, dropped from the figurehead onto the deck with a light, steady step, and let out a long breath of relief as he landed with a thud. Nozdon, his massive body finally giving out, collapsed onto the deck. He stared at the soft, billowing clouds beneath the ship and then at the wondrous island looming in the distance. Relief softened his usually blunt features. "Saved, ugh," he muttered, and then his stomach revolted once more. He turned his head and vomited violently over the side. "Well done, Nozdon." A crewman slapped him on the back, laughing. "At least you didn't puke on the deck." Everyone burst into laughter. The suffocating tension that had hung over the ship moments before evaporated. Kozuki Oden gripped the railing with both hands, leaning almost out over the hang. He sighed. He stared at the cotton-soft sea of clouds, and then at the island floating in the sky ahead, eyes wide with undisguised awe and exhilaration. Wah! My diary! Where's my diary? He cried, whipping around and fumbling frantically in his bosom. It would be an unforgivable sin not to write this down. A sea in the sky, an island on the clouds. Wah! Rayleigh, Jabba! The two kids, Shanks and Buggy, had already rushed over, their eyes shining like stars. Are we going to explore that island now? Of course, Roger's booming voice rang out. He sprang down onto the deck, waving energetically. All hands, listen up, hoist the sails. Destination, Sky Island. Oh, 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 oh! The previously silent Oro Jackson erupted again in thunderous cheers across that white ocean. Chapter 73, Golden Country. The Oro Jackson's hull slid against the cloud sea with a soft shush, like a whisper from a lover. One by one, the crew climbed down the gangplank and set foot on the strange, springy surface, feeling the odd mix of novelty and absurdity under their soles. Buggy crouched and poked at the ground with his fingers. His hand passed through effortlessly. When he pulled back, he held a little wisp of cloud between his fingertips. Hey, Shanks, he crowed, this stuff can really hold people. Shanks, copying Kyle, gave a light hop and bounced twice on the cloud sea as if on a giant trampoline, laughing with delight. Kozuki Oden went further still. He dove in headfirst and came up with his mouth full of cloud, hair tousled and clothes dampened by the fluff. He wiped his face and guffawed. Oh ho, this sea isn't salty. They were all enjoying themselves when a majestic voice rang out nearby. Guests from the blue sea, welcome to Sky Island, Skypiea, the land of the gods. Everyone turned toward the sound and saw an old man with a long white beard descending slowly through the sky, sitting astride a winged Pegasus dotted with dark spots. At first glance, the animal had the elegant posture of a horse, but its eyes were ridiculously innocent. A closer look revealed it to be a gigantic duck with Pegasus-like wings. I am the god of this place, Ganfall, the old man announced as he landed. When he dismounted, the Pegasus duck folded its wings and waddled obediently behind him. God? Buggy trembled and slipped behind Jabba. Roger, however, didn't bother with reverence. He laughed, stepped forward, and offered his hand warmly. Yo, hello, God. We're pirates. I'm Roger. Thanks for the welcome. Ganfall studied the man who showed no awe. Surprise flickered across his face, but he still took Roger's hand politely. Pirates, what rare visitors. That you have reached this island must be fate. Please follow me. Allow me to host the warriors who have come from afar. Guided by Ganfall, the group entered Angel Island. The architecture was unusual. Most houses were dome-shaped and decorated with pristine white angel wing motifs. Many of the islanders had small, delicate wings on their backs. They peered at the newcomers, these wingless people from the blue sea, with shy, curious eyes. What really amazed the crew were Sky Island's specialties, the mysterious little devices called dials. Oh, what's this? Buggy called, holding a shell he'd picked up at a stall. The vendor smiled and explained, That's a tone dial. It records and plays back sounds. He tapped the top of the shell, and Buggy's shout from a moment before poured back out exactly as it had been shouted. Neat, Buggy crowed. Shanks, picking up another oddly shaped shell, blew into the opening. That one's a wind dial, the vendor began to say, but before he finished, a sudden gust blasted from the shell and blew Shanks backward. His red hair was left in a wild bird's nest mess. Buggy doubled over, laughing so hard he stumbled into a nearby shelf. A plain-looking shell toppled into his arms and suddenly contracted with a sharp snap. Bang! A concussive shockwave slammed into Buggy's midsection. He went white, doubled over like a shrimp, and spat froth from the corners of his mouth. What kind of dial is this? He managed. That was an impact dial, the vendor said, matter of fact but warning. Be careful, the recoil is very strong. Kyle, watching the display, was clearly intrigued by the little gadgets as well. He lifted the impact dial, closed his eyes, and listened to the pulses trapped inside. The way it worked was remarkably like his devil fruit power, only purer, more concentrated. After a moment, he set the shell back where it belonged. Sky Island's technology, he realized, was closely tied to the manipulation of waves. That evening at the banquet, Gonfall laid out Sky Island's specialties, skyfish and cloud vegetables. After a few rounds of drinking, Roger leaned forward and asked about the island's legends. Ganfall, I heard, there's a city of gold somewhere above this cloud sea? Ganfall put his cup down, his face taking on a complicated look. You've heard that one too? The Golden City, Shandora. It isn't just a story. Long ago, it was lifted into the sky by the giant jack beneath our feet. It sits up in the upper yard. That area now belongs to the Shandian warriors, the people who were swept up onto Sky Island 400 years ago. They've been fighting us for centuries, trying to reclaim their homeland. At the mention of a golden city, Buggy's ears practically jumped. His face, which had been the pale green from the impact dial, flushed a greedy, hungry red. A light flashed in Roger's eyes, not the glint of greed, but the eager sparkle of an explorer finding a new coordinate. Shandian warriors? Sounds fascinating. We've decided we're going to see this upper yard. Ganfall tried to talk them out of it, but Roger's gaze left no room for argument. With a helpless sigh, he gave them directions to the route up to the island of the gods, upper yard. The next day, the Oro Jacksons set sail again. They climbed along a colossal vine that seemed to reach into the heavens, and at last came upon a vast island shrouded in primeval forest, upper yard. The moment their boots hit solid ground, an ancient, desolate air washed over them. Occasional roars from unseen giant beasts rolled through the trees, and the whole place smelled of danger. Mina, I think I hear something, Roger said, suddenly halting and tilting his head to listen. Rayleigh and Kyle exchanged looks and fell quiet. Even if they couldn't catch the sound, they felt the same strange resonance in Roger, an aura that seemed to wake something deep within the island. Roger pointed down a narrow path, pushed aside the thick undergrowth, and strode forward. This way, he said. They pushed through the dense jungle for hours, until the trees finally fell away and an incredible sight opened up before them. A ruined city lay spread across the clearing, broken walls, ancient temples, broad empty avenues, and everything gleamed as if cut from pure gold. In the sunlight, the whole place shimmered, dazzling and unreal, like the home of a sun god. We're rich. Buggy breathed, his mouth hanging open wide enough to fit an impact dial. Drool ran from the corner of his lips, and his eyes had turned into spinning berries symbols. Sugoi, Shanks murmured, too stunned to say more. This is the Golden City, Kozuki Oden cried, excitement ringing in his voice. At the center of the ruins rose a colossal golden belfry that pierced the clouds. Its architecture was ancient and solemn. A giant golden bell hung there in silence, as if it had slept for centuries, waiting to be rung. There it is! Buggy howled, greed snapping to the surface. He split into a flurry of flying limbs, charging straight for the bell, several throwing knives already in hand, aimed at a corner of the golden bell. I just need to chip off a tiny piece, just a tiny piece. Buggy. Roger's voice wasn't loud, but it hit Buggy like a bucket of cold water. The clown froze midair, turned stiffly, and saw Roger standing with his arms crossed, a half smile on his face. Captain, I just wanted to see if it was sturdy, Buggy stammered. Roger's smile widened, showing a row of white teeth. This bell isn't just gold. He let the words hang for a moment, then added, when you have a crew of your own and have raised your flag, if you still can't forget about it, then come back and take it by your own strength. Buggy went rigid. He glanced from Roger's smiling face to the massive golden bell. The throwing knives in his hands dropped back to his waist as if of their own accord. He floated silently down, reassembled himself, and stood with his head bowed, saying nothing. Shanks stepped up and patted him on the shoulder, but Roger paid the two youngsters no more attention. Roger walked around to the base of the bell and stopped in front of a large, square pedestal. The tablet was out of place among the palace's glitter, in gold, a rough, dark slab carved all over with strange, ancient characters, and it gave off an aura that felt old as the world itself. A poneglyph. Kozuki Oden stepped forward and let his fingers skim the cold stone. He read slowly, translating the script with the practiced ease of his family's art. Fishman Island, Poseidon, her command alone could drag the world beneath the waves. The name of an ancient weapon, Poseidon, pressed on the room like a physical weight. To be able to command the sea kings, the monstrous rulers of the oceans, was almost unthinkable. Everyone there felt the suffocating implication. Then Roger laughed, a sound that broke the hush and scattered the tension. "Kuha! So that's what this is! What an interesting answer!" He showed no hunger for the weapon's power, no fear. Instead, he looked like a child discovering a new toy, eyes bright with curiosity and delight. He turned to Odin, suddenly grave but still smiling. "Odin, I'm ready." Odin straightened at once. Roger pointed to a blank stone plinth beside the poneglyph. "Carve this here too," he said, slow and deliberate. "Use your Kazuki family's script." He spoke each word as if setting a seal. "We have arrived here, guiding this text to its conclusion. Pirate Gol D, Roger." Roger! It was more than a word. It was a declaration that reached across time and space, a challenge and a guide left for whoever might come after, whoever could find this place and understand its meaning. Kozuki Odin felt it in his chest. The breath caught in his throat as the era-shaking weight of those letters washed over him. He nodded, grave and determined, drew his katana from his waist, and, using the blade like a chisel, began to carve the single bold word into the stone pedestal, stroke by careful stroke. Clang, clang. The sharp ring of metal on stone echoed through the silent golden city, as though the very wheels of history had begun to turn with a new sound. Chapter 74. Visited Kazuki Odin finished the final stroke, sheathed his sword, and wiped fine beads of sweat from his brow. He stepped back 2 paces and stared at the inscription, ancient characters fused with the fresh pulse of his haki, his chest swelling with pride. "Kuha! Well done, Odin," Roger said, slapping the stone slab with satisfaction as if it were not cold rock, but the shoulder of a future old friend. Young Shanks and Buggy, though they couldn't fully grasp the inscription's meaning, were swept up by the moment. They straightened their small chests, as if they too had helped create something that deserved to be written into history. The ruins of the Golden City seemed to grow heavier under the weight of that declaration. The air hummed with the mingled force of past and future, a sacred, solemn hush. Kyle stood a little apart from the others, arms folded, quietly taking it all in. A faint smile touched his lips at his captain's boldness and at the incredible nature of the journey they were on. Yet a strange thought began to creep through his mind, curling like a vine. Since he was already here, in an age of grand deeds and in a place steeped in legend, Roger had left the king's proclamation and Odin had left his carved testimony. What about him? Was he really going to stand there and do nothing? Once that thought took hold, it wouldn't let go. He wasn't the type to be mere scenery. He had no desire to steal Roger's thunder. Adding another bland "me too" next to the others would be ridiculous. He wanted something more, singular. His eyes swept over the enormous base until they settled on a corner at the rear, hidden in the shadow of a toppled stone pillar. It was utterly inconspicuous, its weathered surface full of scratches and pockmarks. Even someone walking around the back might never notice it. Perfect. Kyle moved toward that shadow as if by accident, strolling casually. With his back turned to the others, he pretended to study the texture of the gold nuggets littering the base. Then, almost imperceptibly, he lifted his right index finger. A faint, invisible ripple gathered at the fingertip. The air around it warped for a moment, and the surface of the ancient gold beneath his hand began to warm, as if answering to a silent command. He planned to leave his mark with a miniature version of his heatwave breath, tiny infrared rays used like a carving knife. What should he carve? A thought flashed through his head, and he decided to be enigmatic. His fingertip moved, and a line of nearly microscopic script appeared. Listen to the tides, watch the light and shadow, all things speak. The words were deliberately vague, meant to sound deep. He imagined someone a few centuries from now reading them and rolling their eyes. "Oh, please, Riddler, spare me." He shook his head and sent a burst of heat from his fingertip. The inscription softened and melted back into the surface. No. Too pretentious. Maybe a poem, then. Something to show a little culture. He wrote again. "The golden bell is silent. The blue sea sings, awaiting the new king." He stopped before finishing the word king. It read like syrupy sentiment, more melancholic poet than brazen sailor. He knew his own limits. He wasn't as learned as the verse implied. He wiped that away, too. How about a haiku in Odin's hometown style? Short, suggestive, with room for the imagination. He considered it, poised to try once more. He frowned, pacing his options in his head and trying to make the wording feel right. Sky Island's deep clouds, Golden City's dream, a wanderer leaves his name, he muttered, saying it twice and still feeling ridiculous. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration, felt like his brain was about to short-circuit. Screw it. Stop overthinking. A faint red glow flared at his fingertip again. This time there was no hesitation. His movements were quick and sure. In the corner of the Golden Bell's base, 4 simple characters burned into the metal. Was here. He straightened up, clapped the non-existent dust off his hands, stared at what he'd left behind with a small, satisfied smile. No lofty slogans, no grand history, just plain and honest. I was here, he thought. That's enough. Humming under his breath, he stepped out of the shadows and melted back into the crowd. "Hey, Kyle, what are you spacing out about?" Rayleigh called, catching sight of him. Here's a polished version of that line. "Nothing," Kyle shrugged, a secretive smile tugging at his lips. "I was just thinking, if this bell were to ring, its sound would probably carry across the entire Sky Island. If you want, I can. Revise the rest of the chapter in the same tone and style. Please paste the full chapter. Or keep the voice closer to the original if you prefer a more literal translation. Or adjust the level of polish, light edit, full rewrite, or stylistic localization. Tell me which option you prefer, and paste the chapter when you're ready." Chapter 75, Barrett Disembarks. Then I wish you all good fortune in battle. On the cloud bank of Sky Island, Ganfall stroked his long beard and gave a formal bow to Captain Roger and his crew. Roger tipped his hat without a trace of embarrassment, a huge sack of Sky Island specialties slung over his shoulder. "Oh, thanks for the hospitality, Gan. I'll come back for a drink next time," he called, grinning. From somewhere behind him, Kyle shouted, "Gan, you're a goddamn genius," his voice overlapping with the others. "Captain, how do we get down?" Buggy tugged at Roger's sleeve, staring nervously at the endless sea of clouds below. "We can't just jump, can we? We'll be splattered into meat paste." Ganfall smiled and clapped his hands. Not far below the clouds, something enormous began to rise. A giant pink shape slowly floated up, an octopus the size of a small island. Its bulbous head billowed like a hot air balloon, and dozens of thick tentacles drifted lazily through the cloud sea. "This is a special octopus hot air balloon from Sky Island," Ganfall explained. "It will envelop your ship, use the gas in its body to regulate buoyancy, and carry you safely back to the blue sea." Octopus? Buggy's face went instantly pale. Buggy hated these slimy, squishy things more than anything. Shanks, on the other hand, sprang up, eyes shining. "Amazing! Are we really riding an octopus hot air balloon?" With the help of the Sky Island residents, the Oro Jackson was gently enfolded in the giant octopus's tentacles, only the deck and mast left exposed. The octopus's head billowed hot air like a living balloon, and the colossal vessel slowly lifted away from the sea of clouds, beginning its descent toward the blue sea. At first, everything went smoothly. The crew stood on deck watching the roiling clouds slip past them, as if they were sailing down a vertical waterfall. "Hey, Shanks," someone called, grinning. "Doesn't that cloud look like Captain Roger's beard?" "Koo-ah! That's a nose hair, not a beard," Shanks thundered, came the puzzled reply. "Pfft, then the one next to it, isn't that your red nose?" Shanks goaded, pointing. "You idiot! What did you say?" Buggy barked, affronted. As the two boys bickered, a sudden, fierce gust of wind slammed into them, without warning. The octopus that held the ship seemed to flinch. Its great body shuddered violently and let out a plaintive, strangled sound. The Oro Jackson rocked hard. People were thrown off balance and went sprawling across the deck. "Wah! We're gonna fall!" someone screamed as the ship lurched. "We're going to die! We're going to die!" Buggy clung to the mainmast, snot and tears streaking his face, his whole body shaking like a leaf in a storm. "Koo-ha-ha! Interesting. Faster. Big octopus." Captain Roger laughed into the gale as if he were on a roller coaster. "Captain Roger, this is no time to laugh," Jabba shouted, fighting to hold the rudder steady. The ship lurched again, tilting well past 45 degrees. Those who hadn't braced themselves screamed as they slid toward the railing. Kyle's eyes narrowed. He planted his foot and stamped hard on the deck. An invisible shockwave rippled outward from him, forming a gentle but firm counterthrust, like a gigantic air cushion, that stabilized the listing ship and stopped the sliding crew. Then Kyle pressed his palms together and sent a barely perceptible, soothing wave out over the water. "Don't be afraid, big guy," he said softly. The wave seemed to reach into the octopus's nervous system. The frantic, thrashing giant gradually calmed. Its movements slowed, and it drew in its tentacles, settling itself. With the creature steady again, the ship righted, and the immediate danger passed. The storm had come and gone in an instant. As the ship broke through the last bank of clouds, blinding sunlight and a fresh, salty breeze flooded the deck. Everyone felt suddenly reborn. Whoosh! With a thunderous splash, the Oro Jackson settled onto the wide blue sea. The giant octopus unfurled it. Its tentacles gave the crew what looked like a farewell shake of its head and then slowly drifted away until it was out of sight. "Sayonara, Octopus-chan," someone shouted. "We're saved." Buggy sagged to the deck, breathless as if his soul had been rattled loose. Shanks wiped seawater from his face and laughed, the sound bright and easy. "That was amazing. I want to ride it again next time." "You shut up," Buggy snapped. Their laughter rolled over the open water, banishing the aftertaste of danger. The crew hoisted the sails once more. The ship caught the wind and surged forward toward whatever lay ahead. Night fell, and moonlight poured over the sea like spilled mercury. After the revelry, the deck grew still again. Only the measured footsteps of the watchman and the steady slap of waves against the hull broke the quiet. Douglas Bullet stood alone at the bow like a frozen statue, his muscular form gleaming bronze in the moonlight. He stared out over the dark sea. There was no hunger for treasure in his eyes, no excitement for adventure, only a pure, burning will to fight. Captain Roger came up behind him, an unlit cigar between his lips. "What are you thinking about, Bullet?" he asked. Bullet didn't turn. His voice was low and powerful. "Captain Roger." Bro glanced toward the three shadowed figures, Kai, Yin, and Tong, and quietly echoed the word, "Captain." Bullet hesitated for a beat, then finally turned and looked Roger squarely in the eye. There was no fear in that look, only resolve. "I want to leave the ship." The words were flat and final, brooking no argument. For a moment, the air itself seemed to harden. From the darkness nearby, Rayleigh paused as he wiped his sword. Jabba, leaning on the rail with a drink in hand, stopped mid-sip. Kyle stood with his arms folded, watching without surprise. Roger's smile vanished. He didn't ask why. He only returned Bullet's steady gaze and waited. "I'm not interested in that final island," Bullet said, each word ringing out. "The truth of history, or some great treasure, they mean nothing to me." His fists clenched until his knuckles cracked, and a fierce aura swelled around him. "I have only one goal, to challenge the strongest people in the world, and then surpass every one of them, to become the strongest in the world. That includes you, Captain Roger." His gaze was a drawn blade, aimed straight at Roger. It wasn't a question anymore. It was a declaration. The deck fell silent. Shanks and Buggy stuck their heads out of the cabin, and hearing those words, held their breath. Roger's response surprised everyone. For a moment he was stunned. Then he erupted into a booming, earth-shaking laugh. "Kua!" He rocked back and forth, laughing so hard he wiped tears from his eyes, as if he'd just heard the funniest thing in the world. "Is that so? Well, good. That's wonderful." He stepped forward and clapped Douglas Bullet hard on the shoulder. "This is the kind of ambition a man should have," Captain Roger said, staring into Bullet's burning eyes. Far from anger, his voice held admiration. "You want to walk your own path? Then walk it. You want to be the strongest? Then go prove it. If you don't have that fire, you don't belong on my ship." Roger's boldness and generosity sent a complicated ripple across Bullet's face. He had expected a fight. He hadn't expected this. "Go," Roger said, withdrawing his hand with a grin. "But I won't call you the strongest in the world, not until I reach the destination. I'll wait for you at the top," Bullet promised. He turned and walked to the rail. The crew moved quietly, readying a small boat and packing plenty of supplies. No one tried to stop him or scold him. They all knew the Oro Jackson was crewed by a band of lawless monsters, each with their own dream and path. Without looking back, Bullet climbed into the skiff, hoisted the sail, and steered away from the Oro Jackson into the vast moonlight. "Hey, that guy just left like that," Buggy muttered, a tangle of emotions in his voice. Shanks watched the sail shrink into the distance, his hand tightening on the hilt at his hip. Captain Roger lifted his eyes to the star-studded sky as if he could trace an invisible path to the final island. "All right, lads, don't just stand there," Roger called, voice booming. "Our adventure isn't over yet." Chapter 76. Millionaire Tuner. Bullet's departure had landed like a stone thrown into a pond, a brief ripple across the deck of the Oro Jackson, then swallowed by the vast sea and the crew's rising spirits. This ship never paused for farewells. It carried too many and too heavy dreams to linger. A few days later, sailing a calm stretch of the Grand Line, the daytime bustle softened under the lazy, golden glow of the setting sun. Seagulls chased the wake off the stern, and everything looked deceptively peaceful. For a band of restless pirates, though, peace was just another word for boredom. "Hey, you lot! Since you're all twiddling your thumbs, how about a song?" Roger's voice boomed across the deck, cutting through the quiet. He had one foot propped on the rail and a bottle of rum in hand, his famous dazzling grin back in place. There was no trace of the quiet solemnity he'd worn a few days earlier when he'd seen a friend off. Shanks and Buggy were the first to answer, sliding down from the crow's nest with laughing faces. Other crew members abandoned their chores and drifted together in pairs and small clusters, eager grins spreading like wildfire. The Oro Jackson's evening was about to get lively. "What should we sing, Captain?" Jabba leaned against the mainmast, polishing his enormous axe. "Do you even need to ask?" Roger took a long swig of rum, wiped his mouth, and grinned. "Of course. Bink sake!" "Yo-ho-ho-ho, yo-ho," Roger began. His voice carried raw, reckless power, but precision wasn't its strong suit, about as accurate as trying to swat a mosquito with a cannonball, depending entirely on momentum. The rest of the crew howled the pirate anthem back at him. "Delivering sake to your side, we are pirates, riding the waves." The chorus rolled out across the deck. Kozuki Odin's voice rose above them all in his native Wano style, every line delivered like a kabuki flourish, exotic, grand, and deliciously off-key. Buggy strained for the highest notes, trying to drown everyone out, but what came out more closely resembled a seagull's shriek than a showstopper. Shanks attempted to follow the rhythm, but he was lost in the din and quickly fell off the tune, laughing as he gave up. The ship filled with raucous song and laughter, the kind only pirates trading sake and stories could make. Rayleigh clutched his wine glass, mouth twitching as he tried to preserve the vice captain's dignity, but the deep furrows between his brows betrayed how much he was suffering. This wasn't a chorus. It was a sonic catastrophe. A bunch of tone-deaf roughnecks at top volume were offering their most earnest tribute to music. Even sea kings would flip over at a sound like this, and the clouds themselves would steer clear. Leaning against the stern rail, Kyle toyed with a small device he'd brought back from Sky Island, a tone dial. His face gave nothing away. Because of his boba fruit power, his perception of sound waves was 100 times sharper than anyone else's. Right now, the crew's singing felt to him like thousands of steel needles plucking at his eardrums. "Master, please, no more singing," Spencer croaked, leaning closer, his expression crestfallen. He was of noble birth and used to court music. This raucous pirate bellowing was not merely unrefined, it was brain-piercing, a kind of demonic racket. "I mean, Kyle-kun," he went on more quietly, "your fruit controls waves, right? Sound is a wave, too. Can't you do something?" He jabbed a finger at Roger, who was belting out the song with all his might. "If the captain keeps singing like that, I'm afraid the Sea Kings will think we're torturing something and rush over to tear the ship apart." Kyle started at the words, then a bright idea struck him. Sound is just a wave, too. It might be overdoing it, but he really couldn't stand listening any longer. He glanced at the handful of trainees before him. They'd only been training for 2.5 months, but their confidence was through the roof, and a mischievous smile spread across his face. "Well, it's not I am possible." He cleared his throat, straightened, and closed his eyes as everyone watched curiously. The next moment, an invisible pulse, emanating from him like ripples on a pond, rolled across the deck and wrapped the crew in its reach. They kept singing on, bidding farewell to the harbor, never looking back, sails high, skull as our sign. The cacophony continued, but then something remarkable happened. The chaotic, wavering noise was as if taken by a gentle hand and smoothed into something orderly and even. Roger's rough tenor was refined into a robust, magnetic baritone. Kazuki Oden's eccentric phrasing became a Japanese-style aria full of narrative flourish. Buggy's piercing squawk smoothed into a clear, beautiful child's voice. Every voice was captured, precisely tuned, and blended into a single, perfect chorus. Then the accompaniment appeared as if conjured from nowhere. Boom-da, boom-boom-da. A steady, powerful drumbeat formed from the compression and release of air, striking like a collective heartbeat. Woo-woo! A winding, plaintive bagpipe rose next, its sound produced by the high-speed rotation and friction of air, carrying a taste of salt and wide-open sea. One by one deeper bass, bright guitars, and grand pianos phased in, instruments materializing from thin air and weaving together into a magnificent symphony. Kyle stood motionless, not moving a single finger, and yet he had the presence of a maestro conducting an entire orchestra. The Oro Jackson itself seemed to be transformed into a golden Vienna concert hall. As the crew continued to sing, however, a chill ran through them. Everything sounded impossibly perfect, and something about it felt wrong. Huh? Buggy stopped mid-step, hand flying to his throat, disbelief written all over his face. My voice just now? He tested it, uncertain, singing a line a cappella, delivering sake to your side. The sound that came out was warm and mellow, rich with just the right vibrato. It was so beautiful he got goosebumps. A genius. I'm a musical genius after all. Buggy preened instantly, hands on his hips as he laughed up at the sky. Not only am I a combat genius, I'm a singer too. Shanks had noticed it too. He turned to Kyle, eyes bright with excitement. Kyle, was that you? Amazing. Roger laughed, louder than his own singing had been. Ha ha! This is priceless. Kyle, you fellow, you truly are a genius. He didn't stop. If anything, he sang with even more vigor. With Kyle's million-dollar tuner boosting them, every pirate felt free to pour out their passion without holding back. Splashing waves, resounding shanties, fearless forward, heading for the distant. With perfect accompaniment and harmonies, their rendition of Bink's Sake took on an unprecedented sweeping grandeur. The little crew of pirates had turned the song into something epic. The song carried everything a pirate could hope for. A homesick ache, unwavering trust in comrades, a calm acceptance of death, and beneath it all, an endless longing for the open sea. The setting sun turned the water into fractured gold. The breeze filled the great sails, and a band of the freest men in the world, aboard a ship already the stuff of legend, lifted their voices together. Their music cut through the clouds and carried far, as if announcing their existence to the whole world. When the last chord faded, a soft melancholy hung in the air. For a moment, the deck was quiet. Everyone stood still, wrapped in the afterglow of the perfect chorus, reluctant to break the spell. Buggy cleared his throat and struck what he thought was a dramatic pose, ready to show off his hidden talents with a solo. Yo, ho ho ho, he began. The sound he made was that familiar, grating squawk, more like a distressed seagull than a sea shanty, and it ricocheted across the deck. Kyle, who had already withdrawn his ability, stood with his arms folded, watching with a mischievous smile. A single suppressed snort escaped, then all restraint collapsed. Ha! Laughter rolled through the crew like thunder. Men bent double, wiping tears from their eyes. Buggy, you fraud! Someone shouted. Shanks, unable to contain himself, was on the deck laughing so hard he could hardly breathe. Shut up! Buggy snapped, indignant, though even his protest came out a little less fearsome than he intended. You lot ruined my performance, Buggy shouted, his face going crimson and his famous red nose seeming to glow even brighter. In a petulant fit, he chased Shanks around the deck. Roger strolled over to Kyle, laughing, and clapped him so heartily on the back that Kyle nearly went overboard. Ku-ha-ha-ha! Well done, Kyle. From today on, you're the Roger Pirate's chief musician. Kyle rubbed his sore back and gave a helpless smile. He watched his laughing, frolicking crewmates as the Oro Jackson rode the waves, bathed in moonlight and sea breeze. Kyle's lofty title of chief musician brought him exactly one perk. Whenever Roger was in a whimsical mood, Kyle was dragged along to act as the ship's million-dollar tuner for whatever gag chorus of tone-deaf drunks the captain had assembled. It was hardly dignified, but it was better than nothing. 2 weeks later, the chaos aboard the Oro Jackson quieted as a strange sight rose on the horizon. An archipelago of colossal red trees jutted up from the sea, their trunks thicker than houses. Dreamlike bubbles, like enormous soap bubbles, floated through the air, and sunlight filtered through the giant canopies, throwing shifting patches of light and shadow across the water. This was Sabaody Archipelago, the end of the first half of the Grand Line, and the only route to the New World. "Oh, we're finally here!" Roger cried from the bow, arms spread wide as if to embrace the peculiar islands. "Lads, prepare to coat the ship! We're headed to Fishman Island." "Coat?" Buggy and Shanks asked at the same time, their faces full of curiosity. "That's right," Rayleigh said, leaning on the rail. "To reach Fishman Island, 10,000 meters below the surface, we have to encase the ship in a special membrane. If we don't, the ship will be crushed like a tin can under the weight of the deep-sea pressure." With the task laid out, everyone fell into their roles. Roger, true to form, took the easy route. He hoisted Kazuki Odin onto his shoulder and announced they were going ashore to look for trouble and fun. Where others saw duty, Roger saw diversion. The job that required patience and a steady hand, the finding of a coating craftsman who could strengthen the hull against the crushing depths, fell to the vice-captain, Silvers Rayleigh. It was the sort of work that needed tact and judgment rather than bravado, and Rayleigh accepted it without complaint. He adjusted his collar, stepped down from the deck, and strolled alone toward the island's shadier quarter, the lawless zone where skilled, unscrupulous hands could be found. No sooner had Rayleigh gone than 3 heads popped up over the rail, each peering in the same direction with eager, mischievous eyes. "Hey, are we really going to follow Mr. Rayleigh?" Shanks whispered, a grin hidden in his voice. "Of course," Buggy snorted. "Captain and the others will probably just end up drinking and brawling all night. That's boring. This'll be better." "Besides," Shanks added, "we might actually get to see the famed coding master at work. That stuff's supposed to be legendary." Jabba, hefting his great axe as if it were an afterthought, offered a grand-sounding concern. "I'm only a little worried about him going in alone," he rumbled, eyes narrowing. The worry sounded noble enough, on the surface, but it was plain to anyone watching that all 3 were itching for an excuse to tail the composed, infuriatingly competent vice-captain. Kyle folded his arms and fell into step behind the 3 of them, a spectator's smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. They kept a comfortable distance, close enough to follow, far enough not to be noticed, like a band of clumsy detectives tailing Rayleigh through the odd streets of the Sabaody archipelago. Rayleigh seemed aware of the shadows behind him, but gave no sign. He simply kept walking at his steady, unhurried pace. At last he stopped in front of a fashionable-looking tavern. The sign above the door, written in ornate script, read, "Shacky's Rip-Off Bar." "Rip-Off?" Buggy wrinkled his nose. "That name sounds expensive. Why's Rayleigh going in there? Is a tailor hiding out inside or something?" Jabba stroked his chin, interest lighting his eyes. "An interesting place." They traded a quick look, wordlessly agreed, and pushed the door open together. The tavern's interior was dim. The air smelled faintly of tobacco and spirits, a quiet contrast to the noise outside. Behind the bar leaned a stylish woman with a striking figure, a cigarette poised between her fingers and a lazy, effortless air about her. She didn't greet him like a normal proprietor. Shacky only lifted her eyelids a fraction and blew a slow smoke ring before asking, "Just you tonight?" Her voice was low and husky, like gravel warmed by whiskey smoke. Rayleigh walked straight to the bar, set his sword at his side, and sat. "A glass of whiskey. Neat." With practiced ease, she picked up a bottle and poured half a glass of amber liquid, sliding it across the counter. 5 million berries, she said without a flicker of embarrassment. Pfft. Buggy, who had only just found a seat in the corner, nearly spat his juice out. He slapped a hand over his mouth, eyes huge. 5 million. This wasn't a surcharge. It was daylight robbery. Shanks, leaning nearby, only clicked his tongue in amusement. Rayleigh, however, didn't even flinch. He took the glass, sniffed the aroma, and drank as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. Then he reached into his pocket, upended a pouch of coins onto the bar, and said casually, "I'm looking for a coding craftsman named Rue." Shacky flicked ash from her cigarette and let a small, teasing smile play at her lips. "Oh? Looking for him, are you?" She regarded him appraisingly. "You don't strike me as the usual sort of pirate. You have a certain scent about you. dangerous, and very free. Rayleigh paused at her words and looked up. The woman across from him might have appeared to be just a bar owner, but those eyes that seemed to see everything stirred a long-dormant curiosity in him. "The feeling's mutual," he said. "A place with prices like this, the owner can't be ordinary either." Shacky chuckled, a clear, pleasant sound. "Heh, I'm just an ex-pirate who washed her hands of that life and wants to run a peaceful little bar." On the surface, their conversation was casual, but there was something taut and electric beneath it. The four of them in the corner had entirely forgotten why they'd come. "Wow." Shanks's eyes sparkled. She really saw through Rayleigh. I think she's a con trying to swindle him out of his money," Buggy grumbled, even as his gaze slid back to Shacky. Jabba, axe across his knees, wore a broad, knowing smile. "Looks like our vice captain's luck is about to change." Shanks and Buggy turned to him at the same time. "Kyle, what do you make of it?" Jabba turned to the man who had been silent all this time. "My lord, there's definitely something off." Kyle closed his eyes, as if listening to something only he could hear. After a moment, he opened them and gave a strange smile. "Their waves are very much in sync." "Waves, like two musical instruments," Kyle said. "Each would sound excellent on its own, but when they play together, they naturally resonate and form an even more harmonious melody. Don't ask questions, just call it a devil fruit power," he added bluntly. Jabba's grin deepened at that. At the bar, Rayleigh and Shacky's conversation ran on. They weren't talking about coding or technique. Instead, they traded sea stories, debated the world's balance of power, swapped tales of New World monsters, and speculated about hidden history. They spoke like old friends who had known each other for years, finishing each other's thoughts as easily as if on cue. Rayleigh narrated his grand and turbulent voyages, while Shaky contributed the gossip she'd picked up from various pirates and her own sharp insights. They made a striking pair. She, unrestrained and daring, he, calm and composed. Yet beneath the differences, they shared the same obsession: freedom. "If I'd met a man like you a few years earlier, I might have sailed off with you," Shaky said suddenly, a nostalgic smile and a teasing glint in her eyes. "It's not too late," Rayleigh answered, earnest light flickering across his face. "My ship is always open to a beautiful woman." A beat of stunned silence, then chaos. Buggy in the corner sprayed his drink all over the table. "Juice, feed me peanuts," he crowed somehow, theatrically outraged. Shanks's jaw nearly hit the floor. "Rayleigh, he actually said that?" he blurted. "Rayleigh, you're breaking character, someone," he scolded in half amusement. Jabba, already picturing wedding gifts, began calculating how much he should chip in. Kyle, wearing an "I told you so" grin, quietly activated a faint counter-echo, looping Rayleigh's line and feeding it into Buggy's ear. "That voice, it's Rayleigh's?" Buggy clapped his hands over his ears, as if some tremendous blow had struck his pure little heart. The tavern had warmed into a buzz of laughter and disbelief when the door slammed open with a crash. "Rayleigh, why are you hiding here, drinking?" Roger's booming voice filled the room, scattering any remaining ambiguity like ash. Come on. I found the coding craftsman. He was hiding in the amusement park." Behind Roger came a bruised and humiliated Kazuki Odin, flanked by several crewmen with fresh wounds, the obvious aftermath of a brawl. The softness on Rayleigh's face vanished in an instant and was replaced by an expression of mild exasperation. He rose and offered Shaky an apologetic smile. "It seems our conversation must end here for today." "No problem," Shaky replied, gracefully gathering the glassware and the money. "You're always welcome to come back and get ripped off, dangerous sir." Rayleigh gave her a long, measured look, then turned and slipped out with Roger. The four gossips also hastily rose and melted away. Outside the tavern, Shanks fell into step beside him and winked. "Mr. Rayleigh," he asked, "who was that woman just now?" Rayleigh didn't answer. He simply watched the soap-like bubbles drifting above the Sabaudi archipelago. A small, unintentional smile pulled at the corner of his mouth, so slight he hardly noticed it himself. Chapter 78. Fishman Island. The craftsman Roger had tracked down to coat the ship turned out to be a scruffy, drunken old man, fast asleep on a carousel in an amusement park. No matter how Roger threatened or tempted him, the man only rolled over and mumbled, "Let me sleep a little longer." At last Rayleigh appeared and said a few words to the old fellow. He immediately snapped awake, hauled himself to his feet, slapped his chest in promise, and agreed to do the job. Before long, the Oro Jackson was moored beneath one of the giant mangrove roots on the Sabati archipelago. The craftsman's skill lived up to his reputation. He formed a huge, elastic resin bubble that wrapped perfectly around the whole ship, refracting the sunlight into a colorful halo. "Sugoi, we're going to sail in a bubble!" Shanks and Buggy pressed their faces to the coating and poked it in fascination. On Roger's command, the ship slowly sank, leaving the sunlit surface behind and slipping into the deep, dark blue. Light was swallowed quickly. Outside the bubble, there was a deathly silence. Only the crew's slightly nervous breaths could be heard from inside. From a distance, grotesque, giant sea kings cruised by, their immense shadows enough to make even the bravest sailor's heart pound. "Hey, nothing's gonna crash into us, right?" Buggy's voice trembled. Before he could finish, a huge, lantern-like eye suddenly pressed against the viewport, curiously inspecting the uninvited passengers. "Wah!" Buggy went white with terror, eyes rolling back on the spot. "Kua! Big fella, want to come up for a drink?" Roger called out, waving at the Sea King as if it were an old friend, not a trace of fear in his tone. Kyle just shook his head, walked to the rail, and rested his palm against the hull. An imperceptible electromagnetic ripple spread outward, something ordinary people couldn't sense, and the curious deep-sea beast seemed to understand it as a command. The eye blinked, the enormous tail fin gave a slow wag, and the creature drifted away. Modulating brainwaves to a specific frequency can, to some extent, achieve intracranial communication. That's reasonable, Kyle thought. "Not bad, Kyle," Rayleigh said, raising an appreciative eyebrow. "You're not bad either, Ray, Saboti's ladies' man," Kyle thought with a wry little smile. They continued to descend, and at the end of the blackness an incredible light finally bloomed ahead, piercing the deep. When the Oro Jackson broke through the final layer of water, everyone on deck fell silent at the sight below. Towering coral reefs formed the city's foundations, bioluminescent jellyfish drifted like lanterns, and schools of fish braided themselves into dazzling ribbons that streaked across the sky. Bubbles clung to the islands, and sunlight, refracted through the sea, fell in a soft curtain that wrapped the whole place in a dreamlike glow. This was Fishman Island, 10,000 meters beneath the waves. But the massive pirate ship, its skull flag whipping in the current, was clearly not a welcome sight. No sooner had the Oro Jackson come to a stop than a well-armed contingent of fishmen closed in, led by a burly merman with long orange hair and a beard. Trident in hand, his face grave, he was unmistakable, King Neptune of Fishman Island. "Human pirates, what is your purpose here?" Neptune's voice rolled through the water, every syllable heavy with authority. The guards, blades flashing, treated the newcomers as enemies, fanning out and hemming the Oro Jackson in from all sides. Meanwhile, the islanders of Fishman Island crouched well away from the shore, peering out from behind coral houses with terrified faces as the ominous ship hovered above. An instant hush fell over the deck. Buggy, white with fear, pressed himself behind a mast so only his eyes showed. Shanks rested a hand on his sword, his expression wary. The captain, however, seemed unconcerned by the tridents aimed at them. Roger stepped out onto the rail, beamed a wide smile at Neptune and waved. "Yo, isn't that Neptune? Long time no see. Still as lively as ever." The friendly greeting froze everybody. Neptune's frown deepened as he studied the grinning man. The tone sounded like a neighbor stopping by, but the pirate clothes and the skull-flagged ship told a different story. "Human, don't think you can get away with mucking around. State your name." Neptune snapped, leveling his trident at Roger with full authority. "Kuha!" Roger's laugh rang out boisterously, somehow carrying even through the water. "Honestly, is your memory that bad? Last time you were being chased across the sea by that tiger shark pufferfish, and I was the one who saved you," Roger said. "Tiger shark pufferfish?" At the name, Neptune's face changed. The memory hit him all at once. He blinked, staring at Roger's face, then at the straw hat perched on his head. That laugh, that expression, that brazen rascal. "It's you, Roger," he blurted, his voice a mix of shock, surprise, and an odd embarrassment. The guards around them exchanged uneasy looks. His Majesty knows this pirate? Roger only grinned and hopped down from the ship's rail. "We're just here looking for something. We won't cause any trouble." Neptune's features flickered with conflicting emotions. He lowered his trident, waved the nearest guard away, and the tension in the air eased. With a weary sigh, he muttered, "Come with me. Try not to frighten my people." Escorted by the fishman guards, the Roger pirates entered Ryugu Palace. Inside the magnificent hall, Neptune dismissed the escort and attendants, leaving only Roger, Rayleigh, Odin, and Kyle standing before him. Every time you show up, it's nothing but trouble." Neptune rubbed his temples and glared at the man sprawled across a bench, face smeared with crumbs as he gorged on palace pastries. "Don't say that," Roger mumbled around a mouthful. "I'm here to study history. This is important." Kazuki Odin beside him nodded eagerly. Neptune's expression softened slightly. "History," he said, then met Odin's eyes. "Are you planning to go to the sea forest?" Roger paused mid-chew. "You know about it? The sea forest is the most sacred place on Fishman Island," Neptune replied. "Fragments of the past lie sleeping there." He stood and offered a hand to Roger. "I can take you. Think of it as me repaying a favor." The sea forest lay in a quiet stretch of water deep within Fishman Island, a graveyard of ships. Dozens of hulls and masts rested on the seabed, half swallowed by coral and weed, their timbers telling stories of long-vanished voyages. Sunlight filtered down in wavering columns, turning the wrecks into a solemn, strange cathedral beneath the waves. As they entered that hush, Odin's face changed. A light came into his eyes, reverence, curiosity, something older. He moved forward as if pulled, stepping straight toward the heart of the forest. There, rising from the silt like a relic of another age, stood a massive cubic stone. Its surfaces were scored with an ancient script, silent and waiting. "Found it!" Odin cried, excitement ringing in his voice. The others crowded around as he reached out, fingers brushing the cool stone, and began to read the inscription aloud. "I made a promise, but I failed to steer the Noah toward the sun. I am truly, deeply sorry." Odin's voice carried through the quiet sea forest. The words were an apology from someone called Joy Boy, written centuries ago to a mermaid princess for failing to keep a promise. The crew fell silent, listening. They didn't fully understand all the meanings behind the lines, but 800 years of regret folded into that one confession pressed on them all. "Joy Boy," Roger murmured, tasting the name. "Captain, there's another one over here." Jabba called from nearby. Everyone hurried over and found a second stone, dark red, pulsing with a heavy, almost ominous air. Odin's breath hitched as he read the characters carved into it. "This is a road poneglyph, one of the 4 that point the way to the final island." Roger threw back his head and laughed, wild and triumphant. "Kuhaha, wonderful. That makes 3. 3. Roger's booming laugh bounced through the sea forest as he waved the poneglyph, rubbing like a child, showing off a favorite toy. "Just one more piece, and we'll reach the final island." The crew exploded into cheers. The weariness of long days at sea evaporated. Excitement and eager expectation lit every face. Neptune watched the unruly pirates with a helpless shake of his head, but he made no move to stop them. "Your Majesty, Neptune." A timid voice came from behind the group. Everyone turned to see a small mermaid, no more than 10 years old, clutching the hem of her dress and regarding the boisterous humans with obvious nervousness. Her eyes were unnaturally deep and knowing for a child, and she held a crystal-clear orb against her chest as if it were her only comfort. "Shiarly? What are you doing here?" Neptune asked, surprise coloring his tone. She said nothing. Her gaze swept over the crowd and landed on the rubbing in Roger's hands. For a long, stunned moment, she stared as if she'd seen something impossible, something she recognized as Joy Boy's apology. Confusion and shock widened her eyes. "The promise will be fulfilled," she murmured, her voice soft but surprisingly clear. "In 10 years, our king will be born." "King?" Neptune blinked in surprise. "It's the mermaid princess." Shiarly's body trembled as if some enormous truth had struck her all at once. The legendary princess, who can speak with the sea kings. Those words, Poseidon, the sea king, slipped silently into Rayleigh and Kazuki Odin's minds. Both men had recently read the same record on the Sky Island poneglyph. Their faces darkened instantly at the memory and the power the prophecy implied. "Kuha!" Roger's booming laughter shattered the sudden tension. He clapped Neptune on the shoulder like an old friend. "Did you hear that, Neptune? In 10 years, you're going to have a daughter." Neptune's broad frame froze. His cheeks flushed a deep red, and he stammered, glaring through embarrassment. "What are you talking about, you bastard?" "I'm not even married yet," Neptune blurted, mortified. "Then you'd better hurry up." Roger grinned, utterly unbothered by the king's embarrassment. He gave a teasing wink. 10 years will fly by. Don't you dare delay the birth of our princess." The crew burst out laughing at the king's childlike reaction. Roger's curiosity had clearly shifted from the poneglyph to the miraculous little mermaid before them. He crouched down to her level, fixing her with a look of keen interest as he leaned toward the crystal ball cradled in her arms. "Little one, you're a fortune-teller, aren't you? Come on, tell us our fortunes too." Shirley flinched at the intensity of his gaze. It felt almost like fire, and she instinctively tried to hide herself. "Don't be afraid, Shirley," Neptune soothed, with a note of helplessness he didn't intend anyone to notice. "They're not bad people." Reassured by the king's tone, Shirley relaxed a fraction. She lifted her head slowly, met Roger's eyes for a moment, then closed her own. Her small hands rested on the crystal ball. For an instant, her pupils constricted, as if focusing on a distant point. Her expression turned blank and distant, as though she were seeing something far ahead in time. "I see." Thunderous applause, she murmured, voice unsteady. "And a single lonely curtain call." Confusion colored her words, as if the images she saw didn't fit together in her mind. "But that's not the end. It's the beginning. The sea is boiling," Shirley whispered. "Oh, that sounds promising," Roger said with a grin, completely unfazed. "What about him, my first mate?" He yanked Rayleigh forward from behind him and shoved him in front of the crystal ball. Shirley peered into the glass. The image wavered for a moment and then snapped into focus. The dashing, carefree legend everyone knew was gone. In his place stood an old man, caked in pitch and oil, beard unkempt, hammering nails into a ship's hull. "Are you a shipwright?" Shirley asked, tilting her head, uncertain. "Pfft." Buggy and Shanks burst out laughing at the same time. "A shipwright? Mr. Rayleigh? Is that for real?" "The dignified Pluton," someone scoffed. "Is his retirement really going to be doing carpentry?" Rayleigh was momentarily stunned, then rubbed his chin and broke into a free, amused laugh. "Sounds like a peaceful retirement." Jabba chuckled and pushed forward impatiently. "Ha! Come on, little girl, show me my future!" Shirley's gaze shifted to him. The light in the crystal swirled, and the smile drained from her face. Her expression became serious. "I see. A fierce battle," someone murmured. "The opponent is enormous, like a mountain, wrapped in shadow. I can't make out its shape." Jabba's breathing hitched, and a wide grin spread across his face. "Now that's more like it." "But," Shirley's voice took on a strange edge, "you didn't use a weapon." Jabba blinked. The little mermaid continued, eyes fixed on whoever was speaking. "You, with your bare hands, pinned that behemoth beneath you." The crew exchanged looks, and almost involuntarily, a vivid image formed in their minds. A shirtless man grappling with some gigantic, indistinct beast. Someone couldn't help but ask, "Were your clothes ruined in the fight?" A puzzled silence followed. Kyle, unable to hold it in, burst into laughter. "It's like a turtle going to school," he chuckled, then tried to stifle himself. All attention turned to him. Roger laughed and slapped his knee. "Our musician's up. What earth-shattering symphony will he compose this time?" Shirley's gaze slid to Kyle. The moment their eyes met, she looked as if an invisible hammer had struck her. She staggered backward, drained of color in an instant. For the first time since she'd begun using them to see the days ahead, Shirley's eyes were nothing but pure terror. "Shirley!" Neptune cried, hurrying forward to catch her before she fell. The crew's laughter died mid-sentence. Everyone felt the change in the air. Rayleigh's voice lowered. "What is it? What do you see?" Shirley's reply was little more than a broken whisper. I can't see clearly." Her hands clutched her head as if trying to hold back the vision that battered her. Her lips trembled as she forced words out. "The earth, it's shaking, rising and falling like waves. The sky, it's splitting like a cracked mirror. Gigantic waves, waves that swallow everything." Each fragment cut through the clearing like ice. This wasn't a fight between men. This was a natural cataclysm, the end of the world. The sea forest fell deathly quiet. Even the fish seemed to sense the chill and darted away. "Then what about Kyle?" Jabba asked, voice dry. Shirley lifted her head. Her eyes were glassy with dread as she stared off into the distance. "He's there, she said, each word barely audible, right in the center of it all, with his back to the whole world. Chapter 80, Elephant Master. When his words died away, a heavy silence fell. The crew all turned to Kyle at once, faces full of shock and confusion. The prophecy was too vague and too terrifying. Was he the incarnation of catastrophe, the harbinger of the apocalypse, or simply someone standing at the world's end, composing the soundtrack to its destruction? Kyle felt the weight of their stares and, for once, was at a loss. Did I really become evil, like Gorman? He wondered. He'd always thought himself sane and steady, and the bleak vision Shirley had described didn't necessarily mean he'd cause it. Still, the image stuck in his mind. A lone figure, turned away from all living things, back to the world. It was melodramatic, so exaggerated it verged on camp. Just as the tension threatened to become unbearable, a roar of laughter cut through the room. Roger slapped his thigh and doubled over, laughing until tears gathered at the corners of his eyes. "Hey, hey! What are those faces for?" He choked out between guffaws, unable to keep a straight face. "Isn't this great?" Gol D. Roger grinned, looping an arm around Kyle's neck in a mock chokehold that was half embrace, half menace. He flashed a radiant smile and winked at the others. "Back to the whole world, eh? Now that's imposing. Far better than some old coot who ends up making coats after he retires, right, Rayleigh?" Pfft! Shanks and Buggy, who had been trying to stifle their laughter, burst out again. Rayleigh, who had been stroking his chin in mock seriousness, couldn't help the twitch at the corner of his mouth. He rolled his eyes. "Captain, my peaceful retirement can't survive comparisons like that." "That's more like it," Jabba boomed. He fixed Kyle with a fierce look. A strange, eager light came into his eyes. "Who cares if the world's ending? When it happens, we'll just fight." Everyone fell silent for a heartbeat, then laughter broke out across the deck. Whatever grimness had been in the air evaporated. They were the Roger Pirates, madmen who treated life and death as nothing more than part of the job, who found joy standing on the very edge of a blade. How could a vague prophecy, no matter how frightening, make them doubt the comrades they lived with every day, or throw the course of this ship off track? Roger had Kyle in a mock chokehold, rolling his eyes, and Kyle only managed to wrench free with some effort. He scanned the faces around him. Everyone's expressions had already smoothed back to normal. His surprise softened into a wry smile. He turned to Shirley, who was still shaken, and returned her look with a gentle smile. Shirley stared at him blankly. There was no lingering gloom in Kyle's eyes. They were as clear as the waters above Fishman Island. Slowly, the fear ebbed away, leaving only a deep confusion. All right, Roger clapped loudly to pull everyone's attention back. "We've got the road poneglyph rubbing and the prophecy's been heard. Time to go. Neptune, thanks for your hospitality." Neptune watched the pirates as they snapped back to their usual vigor, and the sight only made his headache worse. Roger sighed, waved, and called, "I'll see you off." Before he turned away, he hooked his arm around Neptune's broad shoulder, as if sharing some confidential state matter, and leaned in to whisper, "Listen, Neptune, 10 years will fly by. You'd better hurry." Neptune stiffened, his colossal face flushing down to his neck. He shoved Roger away and snapped, exasperated, "You, get on the ship now." Roger laughed, a booming, infectious sound. A giant bubble of air formed around the Oro Jackson and began to rise. The crew stood on deck, waving down at Ryugu Palace as it receded beneath them. The island's people no longer watched in fear, as they had the first time. Instead, many brave children waved their small hands curiously from below. As the bubble climbed, the deep, dark blue of the sea lightened into the warm colors of dawn. With a soft pop, the bubble burst, and the ship broke through the surface into the sunlit world. Everyone inhaled the come, a salty breeze like a fresh breath of life. "Set sail," Roger cried from the bow, vibrant and full of purpose. "Lads, our target, the last road poneglyph." The Oro Jackson rose from the depths that had held Fishman Island and returned to the unpredictable surface of the Grand Line. The sun sat pleasantly overhead and a warm sea breeze flowed across the deck. Spirits were high. Shirley's grim prophecy had long since been tossed aside and turned into nothing more than fodder for jokes. "Hey, Rayleigh," Shanks said, mop in hand as he strolled up to the first mate, who was calmly polishing his sword. He grinned. "Want me to get you a set of work clothes?" You know, the kind for polishing. Rayleigh didn't even look up. He kept the slow, precise motion of the velvet cloth over the blade. Don't bother me about my retirement until you can land 10 hits on me, kid. Pfft, Buggy, hovering nearby, snorted. Shanks, you should worry about not getting your head knocked in by Rayleigh's wooden sword first. What did you say, Red Nose? Shanks shot back. Want to throw down, Curly? Buggy challenged. In an instant, the two apprentices were on each other, brawling with the noisy enthusiasm of young men who still had the sea and the whole world ahead of them. Kyle leaned against the mast, fingers picking idly at the air and coaxing out a string of barely audible scales. He watched Shanks and Buggy squabble nearby, then glanced toward Roger's broad back at the helm and couldn't help a wry smile. They'd been at sea for days when the Oro Jackson slipped into a strange, uncharted patch of ocean. Without warning, a thick, milky white fog rolled in from every direction like giant wisps of cotton candy, swallowing sea and sky. One moment the sky had been clear, the next visibility dropped to less than 10 meters. The air turned damp and sticky, the sound of the waves seemed to be muffled, and an eerie hush fell, so that the only thing left was the steady whoosh of the hull cutting through the water. All hands, be on alert. Rayleigh's voice cut through the silence, taut with vigilance. Keep watch, and don't let your guard down. The crew snapped to their stations. The easygoing mood that had settled over the ship evaporated in an instant. A laugh bubbled up from the fog, strange and off-key, reverberating around them. Kwah! Interesting. What treasure could be hidden in this fog? Roger asked, more excited than afraid, leaning out from the bow as he squinted into the haze with bare eyes. Kyle joined him, brow creased. This fog isn't normal. The sound waves and electromagnetic pulses I sent out are being absorbed. The returns are all scrambled. Roger stroked his chin, his smile widening. All the more reason to poke around then. Hey, Buggy, up to the crow's nest, shouts from below. Your red nose stands out in weather like this. Maybe it can act as a beacon. Damn you, Shanks, my nose is not a beacon. Buggy stamped his foot, offended, but he grabbed the rigging and clambered up to the high crow's nest anyway. Report immediately if you see anything. Got it, got it. Quit nagging me. Perched above, Buggy snatched the spyglass that hung around his neck and peered out grumpily. All he could see was an endless swell of white that seemed to dull the senses. He yawned. Can't see a thing. How could an island be hiding in this godforsaken mist? He hadn't finished the complaint when his body suddenly went rigid. Through the telescope, a vast shadow loomed in the thick, distant fog. It was far too big to be anything ordinary. Buggy tightened the focus, squinting to make out what it could be. The shape resolved into a huge, almost cylindrical silhouette. A pillar? He muttered, baffled. How could there be a pillar that big in the sea? A volcanic rock spire, maybe? He instinctively nudged the telescope upward to gauge its height. His view followed a rough, deeply wrinkled gray surface that at first looked like rock, but as he traced it higher, the texture shifted. It didn't look like stone at all. It looked like skin. The thought was absurd and cold enough to give him goosebumps. He kept scanning. Above the pillar, the surface swelled into an even larger mountain-like bulge, a rounded, undulating mass that resembled a joint. A joint? The idea hit him like a punch. His breath stopped, and the hand holding the scope began to tremble. He jerked the lens past that enormous knuckle and pushed upward again. The view ended in more unfathomable, dense fog. This wasn't a pillar. It was a leg. They stared up at it. A single leg of a colossal creature, planted on the seabed 10,000 meters below, yet towering up into the clouds. Their ship, positioned at its base, looked no bigger than a speck of dust. Buggy's throat gurgled incoherently. His face had drained of color, and his mouth hung open in a perfect O. Hey, Buggy, what is it? An island? Shanks called up impatiently from below. Buggy answered with a high, heart-stopping scream that seemed to split the sky. That's not a pillar. It's an elephant walking in the sea.